Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 23, 24, 24X, and Endgame of Fire Emblem Thracia 776. We've made it to the end of our second game. I'm very excited for multiple reasons to be finished with Thracia, and I hope you guys enjoyed the ride along with me. And I hope you enjoyed, talking about these coming chapters as well. But before then, we have a couple things that I need to resolve, follow up on, whatever. First of all, let's talk about the question from last episode, which was, which is your least favorite and or favorite Gaiden chapter in FE5? And honestly, I got a pleasantly varied series of answers. So I'm going to go through a few of them right now. At Biozilla on Twitter says, my favorite Gaiden chapter is 21X. With its multiple hallways and rooms, the fortress is kind of like a little Zelda dungeon. I was able to weave through the building at my own pace and enjoy the various combat situations its layout offers. My least favorite Gaiden is a toss-up between 4X and 24X. In both chapters, you are at huge risk of losing an important unit to stupidly cheap game design. I had to reset so many times for the first turns of 4X, and the warp tiles in 24X are just cruel if you aren't prepared. Full agreement on that with you there, Biozilla. I also really like 21X and really don't like 4X. I want to give some of my own opinions on 24X because I also don't like it very much, but we're going to save that for when we actually talk about the chapter in this episode. And then I got a few replies over on Discord from various friends of mine who all, I think mostly gave different answers. I heard 8X as the best Gaiden map. Reasoning there wasn't super well detailed, but I think, even they were like, well, it's not good, but it is probably the best that the game has to offer, in my opinion. So they don't really like any of the Gaiden maps. I saw a 4X as the worst on Discord as well. I believe I saw a 2X as the worst. There was, I think, a 14X as the best. So I got some pretty varied responses there. And I find that very interesting. I think that all of these Gaiden maps have different elements to them that at least make them unique. And frankly, I don't think any of them are very good except for 21X. My least favorite, personally, is, well, it's 24X now. But if you had asked me last episode when I actually asked the question for the first time, I would have said 12X probably, because I think if you aren't warp skipping that map, it becomes incredibly boring and tedious. But I understand why people wouldn't necessarily have it as their least favorite, because the majority of people are just going to use warp to get to the end, and that's fine. But for me, it was a miserable experience. But 24X did manage to top it, if you can believe it, or I guess bottom it. I don't know. I'm not sure what you would use in this context, but anyway, and I've already talked about 21X and why it's my favorite map in the game, or not my favorite map, my favorite Gaiden map in the game. So if you're interested in any of my thoughts on that, then you can go and listen to the last episode, which is where I talked about 21X as well. And then in this episode, I'm talking about 24X, so that's very exciting. Can't wait to get to that. Now, before we start talking about the different maps in this episode, there is one other thing that I need to do real quick, and that is talk about Reinhardt. I didn't mention Reinhardt very much in the last episode. I talked about him a lot in the context of gameplay, and how I thought he was really obnoxious. But what I neglected to do, mostly because I was focused so much on the gameplay in that episode, was talk about him as a character. And I think Reinhardt is an extremely interesting character in a lot of ways. And I didn't want to do him a disservice by going through his game without talking about him at all. So I definitely want to mention him here. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I figured I might as well talk about it a little bit. So Reinhardt is, I'll start with the obvious, right? Elephant in the room. If you are at all familiar with Fire Emblem Heroes, the mobile game, you know that Reinhardt was a monster for a good couple, I think it was like a year or two. Reinhardt was like one of, if not the best unit in the game. He was incredibly powerful. He had his Brave Tome. He was just really strong, had really good stats on a horse, which were really powerful back then. I think since then they've kind of nerfed horses a little bit, but Yeah, back then Reinhardt was like near the top of the weight class. He was just excellent in every regard, and a lot of people started really liking Reinhardt. People who had never played Thracia 776 were like, "Hey, this Reinhardt guy's pretty cool. I wonder what role he plays in his game, in Thracia." People who have played Thracia maybe started thinking of Reinhardt in a different light because of what Heroes has done. I myself have never played Heroes. Well, that's not true. I did play Heroes for a while. I did actually have a Reinhardt. Like, I pulled a Reinhardt when he was really, like, top of the pack, really strong. But I never got into the game enough to really bother with the multiplayer, so I never got much use out of that. But, it was still fun to mess around with him. But I never really got invested in Reinhardt from that angle. But just from how prevalent he became in the community through memes and through, conversation, it kind of leaked out into the Fire Emblem overall community, not just the Heroes community, but the series fandom as a whole. And I think at some point I kind of Mandela affected him into a more prominent role in the story, because if you really go back and look at Reinhardt in this game, he doesn't do anything. You could, at best, describe him as a prominent secondary villain, but even then, I really don't think that's accurate. He gets talked about for a few maps. He shows up briefly in Chapter 20 to just say, like, hey, make sure you beat Leaf or you're gonna die. And then he shows up in 22 and is incredibly strong, but in terms of the story, he barely does anything, especially if you don't have Olwen. He doesn't, nothing happens. You don't get any more context into who he is. All we really know about Reinhardt is stuff that people say about him, which, I mean, I guess if you wanted to be generous to Kaga, you could say that maybe he's making some kind of point with that, how, people will take legends and facts and myths about a person in a prominent role and kind of like spin them out of control to the point where their actual personality is less relevant than what other people think about them. I think, that's not an invalid read of the story, but that's also not really the point. I think the point I'm trying to make is, like, this isn't a criticism. It's just kind of a phenomenon that I see a lot, is that even people who have played Thracia, I feel like, conflate Reinhardt with more content than he is actually around for, or that he actually has in the story. Anyway, all that aside, I fucking hate Reinhardt. I think Reinhardt is the biggest piece of shit in this entire game. That's not true. Connemore is the biggest piece of shit in this entire game. If there's one thing I took away from this replay, is that I was completely neutral on Connemore before. I didn't know anything about him, but now I fucking hate Connemore. But before this playthrough, before this replay, Reinhardt was probably my least favorite character in the game, and is still probably my second least favorite character in the game, because of a lot of the stuff that's implied about him throughout the story really does not paint him in a very favorable light. And I'm curious, like, what other people's thoughts on him are. I don't know a lot of people who stan Reinhardt and call him like a great villain or anything like that, because again, he's not around for very much of the story, but I am curious what people think about him, because from my perspective, what we see of Reinhardt is, Olwen really looks up to him, and, as far as we can tell, Olwen is a pretty good person, so it stands to reason just implicitly that there's something good deep down about Reinhardt, because otherwise Olwen wouldn't respect him so much. We also hear a lot about him through Dorius as being kind of a very awe-inspiring knight. Like, I think he refers to him as a damn fine knight, which Dorius doesn't give a lot of details about what that means, but that kind of segues into August saying, like, hey, he is a monster who kills children, so why are you calling him a damn fine knight if he's a, a fucking sociopath? At which point Olwen kind of like puts up a fight and says, like, hey, no, that can't be true. Like, my brother would never do that. She didn't know about the child hunts, which stands to reason maybe Reinhardt didn't know about the child hunts, and those are just bad rumors. But then later on, we see information that kind of contradicts that. It's a little bit of a mess, and we're not really given a proper understanding of who Reinhardt is as a person. Again, maybe intentionally, which would be kind of interesting, but the implications are pretty clear if you ask me. And the implication is that Reinhardt is in love with Ishtar, and because he is in love with Ishtar, he has decided that he is willing to aid in the absolutely monstrous campaign of the Empire, which does involve hunting down and kidnapping, sometimes even killing, children and other innocent civilians. So, I mean, I make a lot of jokes about, just like in my circle of friends who play Fire Emblem, about the fact that Reinhardt is so down catastrophic for Ishtar that he does these horrible things. And, you know, I joke about it, but it's really, like, Reinhardt's kind of a piece of shit. And we're not given any, like, counter arguments, at least not in this game. My understanding is that Heroes tries to, like, make him a little bit more sympathetic and say, like, oh, I never wanted to do the child hunts or something like that. And I mean, there's a lot you could imply about, you know, would he just be killed if he didn't do the child hunts? Probably. You know, like, are there other reasons that he could, like, maybe he's doing it to protect Olwen? Possibly. Like, all those things are possible, but we're never given any indication that that's true. And the only implication that we get is that Reinhardt has known Ishtar his entire life, or her entire life, and that's the other thing, right? I'm pretty sure there's a pretty significant age gap there, but we'll put that to the side for a second. And Julius, whether he's going crazy or not, seems to think that Reinhardt is in love with Ishtar and has feelings for Ishtar. So, until we see more evidence, which, I mean, if you don't count Heroes, there never will be any more evidence, but you know what I mean. There's just nothing in here to imply that there's any justification for his actions other than that he wants to fuck Ishtar really badly. And, I mean, if you're noticing a pattern here, that's a lot of the same shit that I had a problem with for Conomore, and yeah, I don't think either of them are very good characters, because I'm not sure if Kaga thought that being in love was enough justification to let innocent people die, and to make that a sympathetic decision, but I certainly don't. So, yeah, I don't know, I don't really know what he was thinking there, but anyway, not going to spend a whole lot more time on this. Reinhardt is not a very interesting villain in this game. He just doesn't get a lot of screen time. But the phenomenon of what's happened to him due to his exposure through Heroes, and I think some of the underlying problems with his character. Like, when I do see people talk about Reinhardt, I generally see them talk about him in a very either neutral or positive light. Like, people kind of like Reinhardt. He's got a cool design. He's got a fun class. He's really strong and is kind of imposing in that sense, right? Like, he's a good villain in the sense of he makes you feel like powerless because he's so much stronger than you. But otherwise, he's just kind of a horrible person. But the game kind of feels like he's meant to be sympathetic. Like FE5 doesn't really have a Camus archetype. Who I think I've explained the Camus archetype before, probably with Eldegon and FE4, but basically it's the idea that there is usually in most Fire Emblem games, a powerful general on the enemy side of the war who is a good person deep down, but isn't willing to switch sides and do the right thing for their own personal reasons. And usually it's something like they feel incredibly loyal to their country or to the people who helped them through life. I think Selena is often pointed at as being one of the dumbest Camus archetypes, whereas I personally feel like she's maybe one of the more justified, just because she literally owes her life to the Emperor in FE8. So, that's, you know, I don't agree with her decision, but that's a little bit more understandable. Whereas, as far as we can tell with Reinhardt, he just wants to fuck Ishtar. Or I guess, you know, I'm being crude, but like, if you want to be a little bit more poetic about it, he is in love with Ishtar, which is, I mean, that's fair enough, I guess, but doesn't make him not a horrible monster. It doesn't really feel like a good justification. And I don't know if Reinhardt is meant to be the Camus archetype. He's not really built up as one in the same way that characters like Eldegon, obviously Camus himself, Selena, who else? Mustafa, the best Camus archetype, Mustafa. Writing a Camus archetype is very hard, and I think you can make a very solid argument that it's never been done successfully. But I think that if Reinhardt is meant to be the Camus archetype, he's probably my personal least favorite in the series. He's not very justified. He doesn't come across as sympathetic at all. He's just a monster, and no amount of implying that he is doing it for love is going to make me change my mind on that one, I guess. Okay, now that is out of the way. We answered our question. Oh, I never asked the new question for this episode. So before we get into our chapters, I will talk about that. What I want to know for this episode is, who is your guys' favorite character in Thracia 776? I talked about, when we were finishing FE4, I asked the same question, and I think I'm going to make it a kind of a tradition for the second to last episode of every game, we're going to say, who's your favorite character, and you guys can let me know over on Twitter at IMayMeleeKirby, or email turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. You might want to consider the email option, maybe not for this one, but going forward, just because I have no idea what's going on with Twitter right now. It's going fucking crazy. Elon Musk is a sociopath, and I didn't think it was possible for someone to just completely, drive one of the biggest social media platforms in the world into the ground in a matter of weeks. But goddamn, he found a way, alright, didn't he? So, anyway, if Twitter explodes, don't forget, you got that email option, turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. So, let me know what you guys think. Who's your favorite character in Thracia 776? Oh, and I should mention it here, because I'm going to forget later if I don't, probably. By the time this episode goes out, Thanksgiving will have happened. So if you celebrate, I hope you had a very happy Thanksgiving. Alright, I believe that is everything. So with all that out of the way, we can go ahead and start talking about our chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 23, The Twofold Traitor's Lair. You can tell that they were getting very poetic with some of these names for the chapters towards the end here. A lot of the endgame chapter names are very long and use unusual prose. Whereas I think a more common translation of this one would just be The Fiend's Lair, which I think fits a lot more with the series standard. I mean, I don't necessarily, this is not a criticism. I just think that whoever translated this maybe should have ran through that one more time just to make sure it was accurate. Okay, so in the opening narration, we find out basically the backstory of Raedric. We've gotten bits and pieces of this throughout the game, but this is our first time hearing it explicitly laid out to us in detail, which is essentially that Raedric is a massive pussy. And what he did was, he was originally a soldier in the Leinster army or the Manster army, whatever. He worked for King Caf and Quan and all of them. You know, he was a part of this country's military. Then he betrayed them at Manster, or at the river Thracia, specifically, and ended up, siding with Thracia and killing Caf, or being responsible for his death, essentially. And Thracia took over. Then, when the Empire came, and Frege wanted control of this part of the world, he betrayed Thracia and handed the Empire Manster on a silver platter, basically. So, he is a sleazeball who has absolutely no sense of loyalty. I would have liked to see that come out at some point, like, maybe during his, spoiler alert, when we fight him in the next chapter, if he had said, like, oh, hey, maybe I can betray the Loptier Empire and work for you guys, and then Leaf would probably just fucking kill him anyway, because why wouldn't he? But I just think that would have been interesting, but instead we just kind of hear about it through things that have happened in the past, which is a little bit less interesting, in my opinion, but it is what it is. And then we find out that the citizens of Manster are being emboldened by Leif's victories back-to-back. He's been doing very well recently, and so the citizenry of Manster is fleeing. They have decided that they are taking their chances and just getting the hell out of Dodge. And they're being helped by Ced, who, if you remember, back in the Manster arc earlier in the game, he was there, he helped Leif escape, and then he basically said, hey, I'm going to stick around and help the people in Manster to get out. So we see him here basically following through on what he said in those chapters. At the beginning of the chapter, we see Ced kind of struggling a little bit. I guess Raedric has successfully cracked down on them to the point where they don't really have anywhere else to go. They're kind of stuck in a corner, and they think the jig might be up for a little bit. But then, just in the nick of time, they get help from Sias, who, if you remember, was teleported away at the end of chapter 22. Sias agrees to help Ced and escort the I guess they're all children. So the children who Ced is trying to help, he is going to get them out of Manster. And before Sias leaves, Ced says, hey, if you see Leif, can you please give him this? And he hands Sias something called the Bragi Blade, which is a special sword that can only be used by, quote, swordsmen of holy blood. Which is complete bullshit, but we'll talk more about the Bragi Blade in a little bit. Sias then leaves, and the chapter proper starts. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that Sias is playable. He is blue, he starts off as a blue unit, and he's pretty good. He has pretty middle-of-the-road stats. I mean, they're not bad, but they're not excellent either. But he has A stabs and joins with a lot of really good stabs in his inventory. He also joins with 5 leadership stars, which is great, but I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag here a little early. He doesn't stay at 5 leadership stars. For whatever reason, after this chapter, he drops down to 3, and he stays there for the rest of the game. So, you're not getting 5 leadership stars, unfortunately, but for this map, you are. So, at least you can take advantage of it here. Sias is protecting some children who, they're green NPCs, and your goal is obviously to keep them safe. However, unlike other chapters where there are green NPCs that offer some kind of reward for keeping them alive, in this chapter, you don't get anything. Not that you necessarily need an extrinsic reward to help innocent children, but it is a video game, so you're probably going to expect something like that, and if not, well, what's the point, I guess? I try to save them anyway, because that's just typically how I play video games. Even if there's not necessarily a reward, I try to do optional challenges, especially I enjoy role-playing as the characters who obviously wouldn't just let the children die. So I do my best to keep them alive every time I play through this map, even though I know there's no reward. The children aren't too hard to keep alive. Basically, the structure of this map is that the castle that you need to capture is in the middle. Leif needs to get to the gate, and then it's kind of a spiral shape around the castle, and makes it, so that you kind of have to go down and up and around and all over the place. Or you can just fly. If you have a flyer, if you have Dean or Ida or Misha, I have none of them, but I do have Karine, and Karine has come in real handy over the course of this game, and this chapter is no exception. She really helped out ferrying characters across, and she got a really early boss kill because she was able to just fly over and kill him right away. She was able to get Sias down and talk to Leif, all that good stuff. At some point, you're going to want to have Sias talk to Leif. You don't necessarily need to, but it's probably easier to do it this way, because Sias gives Leif the Bragi Blade, and we're going to talk a little bit about it here. It is a very powerful sword. It is, I believe, 15 might. I don't have the stat page pulled up, but I'm going to try to go off of memory, because I did I'm re-recording this section. I've recorded it once already, so I'm pretty sure I can do this off of memory. It's, I believe, 15 might. If not, it's close to that. It's very strong. It gives Miracle when you have it equipped, which is not, crazy good or anything, but it's nice. It is effective against armors, so generals and armor units are no match. And then it also it negates the damage having effects of something called the Loptier sword, which we have not encountered yet, but basically that is the sword that Raedric is going to be using when we fight him in the next chapter. So this is your most surefire way of beating Raedric. It is not exclusive to Leaf, and the conversation at the beginning of the map is actually only half correct, or like only partially correct, I guess I should say, because it is true that only characters with Holy Blood can use this weapon, but not all characters with Holy Blood. There are plenty of characters with Holy Blood in this game. We know for a fact that several characters have Holy Blood, but the only characters who can use it are Leaf, Fergus, Nana, and Diarmuid. There doesn't seem to be any kind of pattern to this. Like, at first I thought, oh, maybe it's only the sword Holy Blood, like the Crusaders that use swords, Baldur, Hezel, and Ode. But the characters who we know have Ode Holy Blood are Merida and Galzus, and they don't fit the description, so I don't know, and like they can't use it, even though they theoretically fit the description, so I don't know what's up. Avil can't use it. We know that Avil has Holy Blood. It might be, so one theory that I have heard is that it's only characters with minor Holy Blood that can use it. That seems a little weird, and I don't know why it would be written that way, if it was intentional, because, Leaf only has minor Holy Blood, so that part holds up, but Nana only has minor Holy Blood, so that all tracks. Diarmuid, we'll talk about Fergus in a minute, but that's just weird. Like, why would it be designed that way? Like, would Seliph not be able to use it? Like, I don't really get it. So, the most common thought on this is that Kaga just fucked up, and he meant to just make it so that, I mean, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if it was meant for, like, only Leaf to be able to use it, and then he's like, oh, maybe Nana and Diarmuid should be able to use it, and he's like, oh, Fergus might be related to Lachesis, so we'll give it to him, too, and then maybe after that he just got tired of it and stopped, because, I mean, that's fair enough, I suppose. I don't really know what happened there. It's a little confusing. It's not like a big deal or anything. It's not a major criticism by any means, but it's just odd. And then, of course, Fergus, like, what the fuck? Why can Fergus use it? Is he related to someone with Holy Blood? It's been established that, like, Fergus is probably Beowulf's son, right? We've talked about that already. But is he Beowulf's son with Lachesis? Did Lachesis have another child that we don't know about? Is he related to another character who has Holy Blood? I don't know what the implication here is supposed to be. Which is fine. Like, it doesn't, like, not every question needs to be answered. I'm just very confused, and it's not a bad thing. I want answers, which I suppose, it gets the job done at that point, right? If I want to know what's going on, then I guess the mystery has done its job. Or Kaga just fucked up. Maybe he meant to give it to Diarmuid, but instead he gave it to, like, the whole class by accident instead of just Diarmuid. I don't know. It could be that too. Not sure. So the goal of this map is to get Leaf through some method to the center of the map where he can capture the throne, the gate. I thought about that for a solid couple seconds and still said the wrong word. He needs to capture the gate, and along the way he's going to encounter a few obstacles. Now, I don't know what exactly the trigger for this is, but through some means, it is possible for Altena and a squadron of Draco Knights to appear. If you think about this as happening concurrently with Chapter 8 of FE4, this would be the point where Altena shows up and she's trying to convince her guys to not attack, but they say, hey, we have orders from Trevant to attack anyway, so we don't need to listen to you. And she leaves to try to talk to Trevant, and they say, fuck it, we're going to attack anyway. That's what's supposed to be what's happening here, I think. But the thing is, like, it's not always, and there seems to be some kind of, like, trigger that causes it to not happen, that a lot of people just trip by accident. I don't really know if it's, like, meant to be a glitch or or if it's an intended feature. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is here, but basically you might encounter Altena and her crew. Altena herself, I thought she was very threatening because she has a dragon lance, but it turns out that her stats are garbage, and then also she doesn't fight you anyway, so it doesn't matter. I'm kind of curious if she and Dean have like a battle quote together here or something. I do wonder. Because according to the script, she just leaves like right away, but I know for a fact that that's not true because I saw her, like I had the time to hover over her and look at her stats and see that they were terrible. So I don't know. I think there's some kind of bug happening here because I maybe it's a translation patch thing. I'm not sure, but either way, it's weird. I don't know what's up there. Anyway, they're not super threatening. The wyverns may attack you. I'm pretty sure the trigger is getting close to the boss, but I'm not 100% sure. But you can deal with them pretty easily. I feel like they're not crazy strong or anything like that. There's some ballista. There are some horseback units. There are some mages that have status staves you kind of want to put to sleep at some point or silence them maybe. So you got a few obstacles, but the big boy, the one man, myth, legend, the Penta-Axe General is also here. If you're not familiar with the Penta-Axe General, let me explain it to you. So, if you're plugged into the Fire Emblem community at all, you probably know that there are some random NPCs or enemies that kind of gain meme fame or notoriety in the community. Probably the biggest example is 313 Archer from Radiant Dawn, but there's also Rallyman from Conquest. Conquest. There are like random Master of Arms that have 4 rallies and just are just really strong and able to buff your stats really well. So there's a few examples of them throughout the series. I'll be sure to point them out whenever they come up. But this is our first one, I believe. I don't think there were any characters like this in FE4, at least not that I'm familiar with. But in FE5, we have the Penta-Axe General, who is a general who, as the name implies, is carrying 5 axes for some reason. He has, I don't remember what they all are, but there's a hammer, a killer axe, a master axe, I think maybe a pole axe, and something else. I don't remember what the last one is. So he's not that strong. Like, I think his stat variance is kind of like really high even by this game standards. So he can spawn with really low stats or really high stats. Either way, you're probably just going to walk up to him and kill him with magic or a strong sword user. He's not that threatening, but if you can capture him and get his weapons from him, that's pretty cool. The last few maps progress a lot more smoothly if you have some of those weapons, especially if you're using a really strong axe character like Orson or somebody similar. I had Ralph, so I was able to. I kind of fucked up. I don't remember exactly what I think. I released him by accident, but I managed to get a couple of his axes off of him, and they were a big help to Ralph in the final couple chapters. So, at one point, the boss is talking to one of his underlings, and they do a bit which is basically identical to a bit in FE4, where one of the Lop-tier mages in that game loses his long-range tome. And I don't know if this is like a running gag throughout the series that I forgot about. I remembered it very clearly in FE4, but I did not remember it at all here. I was not expecting to see that pop up again. So I got a kick out of that for sure. That was very funny to see pop up again there. He is pretty threatening if you let him hang out around for too long, because the map is pretty small, and the way that units are positioned, it's actually very easy for him to just start launching long-range spells at you. So you're going to want to kill him early. Well, maybe not, depending on what you want to do. We'll talk about that in a minute, though. So don't be too hasty in killing him, but, it might not be a bad idea, basically. Okay, now there is another recruitable unit on this map. And it is Ced. We can get Ced in this game and play as him. He can be a big help. What you need to do to recruit him is have Leaf move into a certain range from the gate, the castle gate. And if you move Leaf into that range, you can actually, if you look at the WAD page, you'll see there's a green square. If you move Leaf into that green square, Ced will appear. He will only appear if the boss is still alive, because the cutscene where he appears has him kill the boss. Basically, he has a conversation with the boss. So if the boss is already dead, even if Leaf moves within that square, he will not show up. Once he appears, you need to talk to him with Leaf, and then he will join your team and become blue. Now, here's the catch. You cannot have both Ced and Sias on your team at the same time. If Ced is recruited, Sias will leave at the end of this chapter and not come back. However, if Ced is not around, you will have Sias for the rest of the game. The choice is not as meaningful as you might think. I mean, they're different characters who have their own personalities and values and things like that, and I like them both a lot. So if you have a strong preference for one over the other, absolutely, go for it and pick the one that you want to pick. But just in terms of the gameplay and the raw functionality of them, they're very similar. They both have A staves, which at this point in the game is 90% of what matters. But the difference is basically that Ced has really, really good combat because he has Forseti, which is very strong, gives him a buff in skill and speed, and he has really good weapon ranks and everything. He's just a very good character all around in terms of combat. Whereas Sias has 3 leadership stars, whereas Ced only has 1. And then in addition to that, Sias is also much easier to recruit because you just have to, if you kill the boss right away and then just get Leaf to the throne, it's just a lot faster and less of a hassle to just not recruit Ced. So a lot of people choose to go with Sias. Sias gets the job done. He has A staves. He's going to be useful. Ced has that really good combat, but at this point in the game, you don't really need great combat. You have so many good combat units already. This is the common narrative. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because I think Ced's combat is actually so good that it honestly might justify recruiting him. He doesn't just kill enemies, right? Anyone can kill enemies at this point. That's not a big deal. He destroys them really badly. Light tomes are not very common, so using Sias for combat is not easy. And there's a lot of magic enemies in the last few chapters who do a lot of damage and are really nasty. So having someone who just completely invalidates their existence for the most part can be pretty handy, and I don't want to undersell that, because I do think that Ced gets a little bit of a bad rap. Because people treat him like he's just another combat unit when he's not. He absolutely isn't, and to say that he is would be definitely selling him short. On the other hand, you don't necessarily need that much overkill, so I definitely understand where people are coming from. Recruiting him is maybe a little bit more trouble than it's worth, depending on what your team looks like. But it is worth seriously considering if you feel like you might be a little bit ill-prepared to handle the last couple maps. If you need a combat juggernaut, you might as well recruit Ced. He's not that much harder to get, and it can be pretty handy. Now, as for me, this run, I went with Sias, because every other run that I've done of this game, I've gone with Ced. I believe this is only my 3rd time only, in quotes, playing through this game. Considering I hate it so much, that's really weird, but, my video game playing habits are a topic for another day. Every time I've played through this game before this, I've picked Ced, and I've used him, and I've enjoyed him, but this time I wanted to try out Sias, because I think Sias is a cool character. I wanted to see what he could do, and he came in really handy, so I definitely think Sias is a great option, but, whatever you choose, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference either way. Now, for the most part, the story of this chapter is pretty unremarkable. They talk about Raedric, Sias and Ced help the kids get out, and then they capture the gate, and they talk hey, how are we going to kill Raedric? And then they have the Bragi sword. As long as Sias is alive at the end of this chapter, even if you didn't talk to him with Leaf, Sias will give you the Bragi sword at the end of this chapter. So you don't have to worry about it. That happened to me, so I'm glad that because I just completely forgot to talk to him with Leaf. So I made sure to, I was oh, maybe I have to reset. But no, he just gives it to you, which is really nice. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on the story of this chapter. I pretty much, what I just said basically sums it up as best as anyone ever could. But there is one section of this story that I find very, very interesting. And that is the conversation that Leaf has with Ced when he recruits him. Basically, it is a very heartfelt, I would say, emotional unloading of Leaf. He kind of dumps a lot of his insecurities on Ced and says, you're so much cooler than me. Seliph is so much cooler than me. You guys are so strong and you're so capable. And compared to you, I'm not meant to be a crusader. I'm not a strong enough crusader. I don't even have major holy blood. I'm just some random kid who could only run away the last time I was in Manster. And Ced turns around and says, Leaf, what the fuck are you talking about? You are so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. You organized an army to come back and liberate Manster, and you have the Crusader's heart. And basically that's what his message boils down to, which is that it's not about the blood you have running through your veins. Whether you have major holy blood or not, what matters is your spirit and your personality and your character. In terms of that stuff, you are more a crusader than the rest of us put together, is essentially what he says. And it's a really nice, heartfelt moment between the two of them. It gives some insight onto Leaf's character, which I think is pretty... I think you can infer a lot of this stuff pretty easily from some of the stuff he says, but this is the first time he really lays it out explicitly, and I think it's pretty cool. I love hearing Ced talk him up like this. They bring attention to the fact that Leaf is actually the youngest of the new generation. I mean, maybe not the youngest of all the new generation, but between him, Seliph, and Leaf, and the other inheritors of the bloodlines and stuff like that, Leaf is the youngest and has been through probably the most traumatic childhood out of all of them. He lived his life as a fugitive, whereas Seliph and Ced lived their lives in relative comfort. So I think Ced brings up a really good point here to Leaf, which is that, have more confidence in yourself because you are, at heart, a crusader. You have everything it takes to be a crusader. I also think it's kind of funny. He doesn't say this outright, but Ced basically says, I wasn't able to succeed. I still essentially lost against Raedric. So by running away and deciding that you need help and to build up support, whereas I just stayed behind and failed, you made the right call, whereas I didn't. I'm reading between the lines a little bit on that one. He does not explicitly say that, as I mentioned, but I think it's a pretty obvious implication. But it's interesting for sure, because I think Ced... I've talked a lot about Ced. I didn't talk about Sias or Ced as characters at all when I talked about them as units, because I've gone through them pretty extensively, especially Ced. I've gone through how I feel about him a lot between this game and the last one. Sias, I guess I haven't really talked that much about Sias, so I'll do it briefly, in just a moment. But I think Ced, has a really nice moment here. I like this conversation with him and Leaf a lot. As for Sias, I find it very interesting the kind of person he is. I think his backstory is really cool. He doesn't have a lot of personality of his own. He doesn't talk a lot about these things that are going on in his life, but you can kind of just tell through the stuff that's going on around him. He is a genius tactician. He inspires so much hope and energy and morale is the word I was looking for, in the people who he leads. And that's all pretty cool. I do like how he opens this map. He has basically... He's kind of lost at this point, right? His goal was to, rise through the ranks of the military and serve as House Velthamer's royal priest. But now that option is taken off the table for him. He doesn't have anything else going on. And so he runs into this situation where he feels like he can help. And he says, yeah, I'll do this. I don't have anything else really. I don't have another purpose right now. So I think that this would be a good use of my time. And I think that says a lot about his character. He's the type of person who, even after all these things have happened to him, even after his entire life is essentially pulled out from under his feet, he still has such a strong moral compass. And I think that that's pretty cool. Other than that, I don't really have a lot to say about Sias. He's not super interesting. I like him. I would still probably put him near the top of my characters because I like him conceptually a lot. But just in terms of what he actually says and does, there's not a whole lot. Okay, so you capture the gate. They talk a little bit about Raedric. The way they introduce it is very funny because they're like, oh, Raedric has this this special sword that makes it so that you can't hurt him very easily. What are we gonna do? And August is like, man, if only we had some kind of special secret weapon. And then if Sias is dead and you didn't get the Bragi sword, that's the end of the conversation. He's just like, well, I guess we'll have to figure it out. But no, most of the time you're probably going to get the Bragi sword. It is possible to beat Raedric without the Bragi sword, which I think is like, that is... You can still softlock, which I think is pretty unfortunate. But in this case, I think it's pretty understandable. Because worst case scenario, I think you have to reset one map and get Ced, because I think Ced can beat Sias, or not Sias. I think Ced can beat Raedric, maybe not reliably, but with some rigging he can pull it off. You also have another character who we're going to recruit next chapter, but he's not always going to be available to you. Basically, the Bragi sword is your best bet, but there are options, and I do like that. It's not completely impossible to beat Raedric without the Bragi sword. It's just harder and might require you to go back and replay the previous chapter, which isn't a big ask in my opinion, especially since 23 is not that difficult. So anyway, they wrap up and they move into Manster proper and start launching a siege on the castle and on the castle basically. And that leads us into chapter 24, which is called The Baron in Black. Leif's army is split into 3 groups. There is the main force in the middle that has Leif, and their goal is to kill Raedric. There is a western group whose goal is to rescue some kidnapped children who are being used as hostages. And then the eastern group needs to handle a room full of sorcerers who are going to be launching status staves at you for the first few turns of the map. They are pretty obnoxious, so you want to deal with them as quickly as possible. There are a lot of optional side objectives in this map. This chapter is actually pretty straightforward, and honestly, I think it's kind of good. Basically, your goal is to kill Raedric and seize the throne, of course, but there's also a side objective here. Kind of 2, if you want to think about it that way. But the main one is that there is a guided map available in this chapter. If you fulfill the requirements, instead of going straight to endgame, you will go to chapter 24X. Now, the requirements are twofold. First of all, you need to have Sarah alive and on your team. She needs to be there. It doesn't matter what level she is or anything. You can have her like a level 1 untrained Sarah, but she needs to be there. She needs to exist. If you fulfill that requirement, then the second thing you have to do is get the Kia staff. The Kia staff is obtainable in this chapter, and the way you do it is by rescuing the children, having them escape, and then one of the children will run over to a door, unlock it, and inside of that room is a chest with the Kia staff in it. So you do need to make sure the children stay alive. You can, I guess, cheese it a little bit if you know that one of the children, the children that unlocks the door is always a boy. It can be a different boy, but there are 8 children, 4 boys, 4 girls, and 0% of the time will a girl be the one that opens the door. So I guess theoretically, if you want to use the girls as bait and have them die, that's mechanically fine. Narratively, you're kind of a monster, but it is what it is, I guess. It's not that hard to just save all of them, especially since rather than attacking your group, the sorcerers will almost always go to capture the children. So it's very easy to just kill the sorcerers when they aren't attacking you. You do have to be a little careful because some of them have Hell, which lowers you down to 1 HP. And then if you're poisoned from fighting the ones with Jormungand, then you will just die automatically. So I had to reset this chapter quite a few times. The other side of the map, you need to kill some sorcerers. You can consider it a side objective since you technically don't need to do it, but it is really recommended, especially if you want to try to get some of their really good staves. There's some awesome ones here. I think there's a Sleep, there's a Berserk if you want that, there's a Silence, there's some Fortify, there's like a Rescue staff. Like there's a whole bunch of really good stuff here for sure. And I think I think I needed basically all of them for the final map. So I'm glad I went ahead and got all these. So definitely at least consider it for your run if you're playing through this as well. The best strategy is probably to just warp somebody in and kill the most problematic sages or sorcerers right away. So killing off like the the sleep staff guy or the berserk staff guy, whoever you feel is like most difficult to deal with, just getting rid of them first. If you have Sias or Sed, they can like silence somebody. There's a few different ways you can go about it. But the main objective is in the center hallway. You need to go up and you need to beat Raedric, probably with Leaf, although I guess you could also do it with Nana, Fergus, or Diarmid, and kill Raedric. Now, standing in your way is a group of pretty strong enemies, including someone who you might have seen before, a man by the name of Galzus. And Sias explains that there may be a way to get Galzus to defect onto our side, and that is by talking to him with Marita. If you have Marita, then Galzus might join us if you have Marita talk to him. Sure enough, you have Marita talk to him, and it turns out that Marita and Galzus are related. Galzus is her long-lost father, I guess. They give a little bit of backstory here. Galzus, took his eyes off of her for just a minute, and during that time, she was kidnapped and was being put up for auction as a slave. So I should probably mention this now because I think this is the first time we've really seen it mentioned. These games are rated T for teen, so, and like, there's not going to be like a whole lot of dark stuff in there, right, if they're meant to be played by 13-year-olds. But one of the darkest and most sickening kind of elements of these stories is that there is a pretty consistent reference to a sex slave trade in many of the games. It comes up even in some of the modern games, right? Like I think they mention in Awakening at some point. It's probably I want to say it's brought up in Fates. It's talked about a lot across various different games. In Tellius, there is a very explicit slave trade that you stop, like you actually interact with it and stop it, or at least work to stop it and contribute to stopping it. So it's not like the games often shy away from this. I just think it's interesting because, it's accurate to real life, of course. Like sex slave trade is a real thing that has existed historically and unfortunately still exists to this day. But it's definitely not something you see brought up in media very often for what I assume are obvious reasons. It's very grim and not something that most otherwise pretty fantasy, happy-go-lucky games bring up, right? Now, Kaga is a fucking psychopath, so I wouldn't put it past him by any means. There's some really weird shit in Tearing Saga, and I don't mean that in like, oh, Kaga, you're so quirky. I mean like honestly kind of fucked up, and maybe Kaga should be canceled, but maybe we'll unpack that some other time. But yeah, Kaga is an insane person, so it being here specifically is not that strange. I just think it's interesting that it comes up so often in the more later games, especially since it is pretty sterilized as it hit the mainstream with Marth being in Smash Bros. And then eventually Awakening came out. I think after Awakening they kind of dialed it down a little bit, but that's because that's when it like really hit the mainstream. But I don't know. I mean, it's just when I was playing these games as a teenager, this was really my first time that I was exposed to the sex slave trade as a concept in media, which I think is just an interesting part of my experience with the series. Not inherently like negative or positive. I don't love that it's in here, but I also don't necessarily think that fantasy worlds should shy away from the more gritty, uncomfortable aspects. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I guess basically what I'm trying to say is I don't see it brought up very often, and I think it's something that's worth talking about, just even in passing, So anyway, that's Marita's backstory. Basically, she was auctioned off. I mean, like, they don't make it explicit that it was the sex slave trade in this. To me, I think the implication is pretty obvious because at that point she was a very young girl, and I don't know what you would use I mean, I guess she could have been like a servant or something. But maybe my mind's a little bit more on the cynical side. But in later games, they do very much make it explicit that they are meant to be sex slaves, I think. Maybe this whole thing is just a fabrication on my part, and I actually have some deep-seated problems I need to work through. But yeah, in this, I think the implication is fairly obvious. Hi, so I was editing this part, and I realized I should probably clarify, because all I said was that Merida got sold into sex slavery, and that is not entirely accurate. What happened was that she was put up for auction, and before she could actually be sold to anybody, Avel happened upon her and basically killed everyone who was involved in the auction, which is pretty badass, and is another reason why we stan Avel, along with the many reasons you're going to hear me talk about later on in this episode. So, I just wanted to clarify that. Her backstory is not quite as traumatic as I was making it sound. It was still pretty bad, but not quite as bad as it could have been, I suppose. Anyway, just wanted to make sure that was clear. Anyway, at that point, Marida's like, hey, join us. Galzus is like, alright, you're my daughter, I'm not going to fight you. And Galzus joins our side. Now, if you remember from me talking about Galzus way back in the Manster arc, he is insane. His stats are through the roof. He has A rank in swords and axes. Not that you need A rank in axes, because the best axes are B rank anyway. But he's excellent. His stats are crazy. He has Astra, Luna, just all this crazy. His crit is through the roof. He's really, 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 really strong. And this is your other get out of jail free card. Even if you didn't train Merida, as long as she is alive and you can get her to Galzus, then you basically are able to just kill Raedric. Like, technically, like Galzus cannot use the Bragi sword. He does not need it. Just like if he crits, he can proc Astra, Luna, like all these things are just, it's really easy for him to get the kill here. It's not, a guarantee or anything, but it is quite likely that Galzus will be able to pick up the kill here. Even if you don't get the Bragi sword, Galzus is here for you. As long as Merida isn't dead. Raedric himself is kind of a pushover. He dies kind of like he lived, like a little bitch. He goes down very easily. I just used the Bragi sword with Leaf, so nothing really to talk about here. There are a lot of reinforcements in this map that you can block. I recommend doing that because they're really strong and you don't want to deal with them, so just block them. Eventually, if you rescue the children, one of them will very slowly and tediously, if I may say, make their way all the way up to the door with the Kia staff. And then at that point, you can go in, you can get it with a thief or somebody, and you have the Kia staff. And as long as you have that staff somewhere, and you have Sarah alive on your team, then you will go to 24x. And then once all that's done, you can capture the throne, and that's the end of chapter 24. Pretty straightforward. Not a bad map. In fact, I actually kind of like it, but it's nothing crazy complex. Oh, before I forget, I should mention this. I should have probably talked about this at the beginning, but after chapter 23, all the remaining maps in the game are indoors. There are 3 maps left if you count the guided map, and they're all indoors, so your mounted units are gone, basically. You can't have them on horseback anymore, or on Pegasus back, or Wyvern back. So unless they have a really good sword rank, because that's what most of them are going to be forced to use, you might as well just leave them on the bench. Finn, sorry buddy. Glade, get out of here. Karine, you did good, but time to give up. The only one that I brought was Hicks, because he was really bulky, and I didn't have any other characters who I wanted to bring more. So Hicks was the MVP. He was tanking things like a champ. He didn't have a weapon, but the sorcerers tried to berserk him anyway. So he kind of laid off some of the pressure on my other units. It was very nice to have him around. He face tanked Raedric's attacks like a fucking champion. I love Hicks. I am fully and completely Hicks-pilled at this point. I love him. I can't wait to play through this game again, to use him again. That is not true. I don't want to play through this game again anytime in the near future. But, so just keep that in mind. If you're using a team of mostly mounted units, you're probably going to struggle a little bit here, but I guess that's why they give you Sed and Galzus here as kind of safety nets, so you don't really have to worry too much about it. So yes, chapter 24 ends. The ending cutscene is pretty good. I guess Raedric's body disappeared, kind of vanished into thin air. They're not really sure what's up with that, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because they're in a rush. They need to get to the heart of the castle because even though Raedric is dead, they are still under the control of one of the Lop-tier mages named Veld, who we saw earlier in the game. He is still here. He is still controlling Manster from behind the scenes, so we need to go in and kill him before Manster can be considered well and truly free. Now at this point, Leif says, hey, now that we're here, can we save Avel? And if you have Sarah and you have the Kia staff, August will basically say, oh, well, we have the Kia staff, but we don't have anyone who can use it. And Leif is like, damn, that really sucks. And then Sarah comes and says, well, I can use it because I'm Manfroy's granddaughter, essentially. And Leif is like, whoa, that's crazy. Let's do that then. Thank you, Sarah. And they move on with their lives. Now, this is like the nitpick to end all nitpicks. But I have to say, when Sarah first joins in Chapter 16b, if you played through B route, Salem talks to her and says, hey, you're Sarah, you're Manfroy's granddaughter, you have the power to save Avel. He's like, that's it, that's the solution to the problem that we have. And then Sarah doesn't say anything because she doesn't really care. I don't think Salem actually even says that explicitly, but it's pretty heavily implied that that's what he's thinking. And I guess that scene is not canon or something, because did Salem just not tell Leif? Did he just go the entire rest of the game without mentioning any of this to Leif? I don't know. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he's like, oh, I shouldn't tell him because I don't want Sarah to, kind of be cast out. If they knew she was Manfroy's granddaughter, maybe they would treat her badly. I don't know. Maybe that's what he was thinking. We have no indication of that, but it's possible. That's not like a serious criticism. It's not that big of a deal. I just think it's really funny to think about. They make a big point out of Salem being like, oh, this is the answer, and then nothing? I don't really know. So, we're going into Chapter 24X, which is called the Lopterian Altar. Let me tell you a little story about Chapter 24X. When I first played through Thracia 776, I got this chapter. I used Sarah. I liked her a lot. She was really fun. I read that, there's a guidance map you can get if you get the Kia staff. I was like, okay, cool. I'll get the Kia staff. I'll get the guidance map. I'll get Avel back. And so I did all that. I got the Kia staff. We ended this map, and we started Chapter 24X. I was playing on emulator, and I had a save state. I was using save states very liberally, so I had plenty of save states. We started 24X. I immediately realized that this is the worst chapter I've ever played in my life. I tried a couple times, it just wasn't, I hated it so much that what I did was, I literally reloaded a save state to the previous chapter and got Sarah killed so that I didn't have to play this map. I didn't have a save state from before I got the Kia staff. So I don't ask me how, honestly, but this is many, many years ago, Melee Kirby. So I'm not 100% sure, but I did not have a save state that I could load that did not have the Kia staff. All the save states were from after I already got the Kia staff. So I knew that if I wanted to avoid this chapter, I was going to have to kill Sarah, one of my best combat units, and I did it because I just fucking hated the chapter that much. So what I'm trying to say here is not only does this chapter suck, but it is also the first time that I am playing through it. I had the War of Dragons page pulled up the whole time, so don't worry too much. I still had, I wouldn't say a good time, but I wasn't playing blind, so I wasn't completely flabbergasted by how difficult it was or anything like that. I knew what I was getting into, but we made it. I did it. I came very close to using save states for this chapter, but I didn't. I've still maintained no save states, and I plan to for the rest of the series. But yeah, I'm beating around the bush now. So let's just start with Chapter 24X. The chapter cutscene is pretty basic. They just say, oh, we gotta get through this altar and get Avel and get out, basically, the standard stuff. It is a Fog of War map. Every single Gaiden in this game, except for 21X, is a Fog of War map, I think. Pretty sure that all the rest of them are. That's a big part of the reason why I don't think there are any good Gaidens in this map, except that one. Gaidens in this game, except that one, because I hate Fog of War in general, but especially Thracia Fog of War, I think is awful. I think it makes every map that it's in just borderline intolerable. It just sucks so bad. It's just not fun to play through. So having a Fog of War map right at the end here really just puts the icing on the cake of how much I don't like this game. But if you think that the Fog of War is the only annoying thing about this map, oh boy, do you have another thing coming. So, first of all, the main enemy type you're going to be seeing throughout this map are Berserkers. There are a few of them. Their stats are pretty good. Some of them have stats so high that they can't be doubled by even your fastest units, but some of them are pretty slow. Like, the stat variance is pretty wide. So, they're not crazy strong or anything like that. The problem is that they all have Wrath. And as I mentioned in the Route Split episode, Wrath goes through scrolls. So even if you have a scroll, unless you have a guaranteed one-shot, which, hey, by the way, because of the 1 to 99% hit chance, there is technically no way to guarantee that you one-round an enemy before they have a chance to counterattack you. Just thought I'd bring that up. No matter what you do, unless you have a guaranteed or near guaranteed kill on them before they have a chance to counterattack, they will just crit you and kill you if they hit. Their hit is pretty low. If you're like me and you used a bunch of Sword Masters, you're probably going to be fine. But it's just really annoying, and I don't like dealing with it. Wrath is really obnoxious, and I wish that it didn't go through scrolls. It's pretty easy to circumvent this because you can just have them attack you. They do attack you. So if you just have them run up and smack you, even if they hit, they don't crit necessarily unless they have crit on you. And then you can just kill them in retaliation. So not too big of a deal there. It's a little annoying, but it's not the end of the world. The second annoying, well, I guess the third if you count Fog of War, the third annoying thing in this chapter is that there are status stabs in this map. Specifically in the middle. There is a Sleep, a Silence, and a Berserk. And they can hit you from anywhere on the map. And the most obnoxious thing about this is that they're on something called Magistone, I believe is what it's called, or like Mana Stone. No, yeah, that's what it is, Mana Stone, which gives whoever's standing on it plus 10 magic. That means it is, unless they roll really low on magic, it is basically impossible for you to sleep or silence them. Technically, like if you have the barrier staff or a pure water, you can do it. That's fine. It's just another extra step you need to take because they decided that they were going to put these guys on this brand new fucking stone that we're seeing now for the first time, to make it that little bit more inconvenient. What I usually like to do is warp someone, usually Sarah, into the middle, and have her just kill the guys. I don't know why I said usually, as if I played this map more than once. But for this time playing through the map, I warped Sarah in the middle and had her kill all those guys. It took a few attempts because she can get hit. It's not always consistent. Sometimes the wrong people get put to sleep and silenced. And it's just kind of annoying. But I could deal with all that, right? All of that stuff is doable. It's horrible and I hate it, but god damn it, I could work around it. But what I can't do, what I absolutely cannot fucking do, is deal with these goddamn warp tiles. Warp tiles are a concept that were introduced back in Chapter 16b, and they were already annoying enough there. It was not a Fog of War chapter, and the warp tiles did not put you in any serious danger. They just kind of warped you to inconvenient positions, and it was a little tedious. I would gladly take that over what they decide to do here. If you stand on one of these warp tiles, which are not indicated in any way, even after you stand on them, if you end your turn on one of those without taking an action of any kind, it teleports you to a room at the bottom of the map from which there is no exit. So your characters need to either rescue them, or someone needs to rewarp into the room, warp the other person out, and then rewarp themselves out. There are many of these scattered throughout the map. You have absolutely no way of knowing where they are unless you have the War of Dragons page pulled up. So if you're playing this game blind, prepare to fall into that trap again and again and again and again. There are at least a dozen of these scattered throughout the map, and it's so fucking obnoxious. Why did they do it this way? Why could they not at least have them glow when you stand on them for the first time so you don't forget where they are and accidentally stand on it again? Why could they not have the room be, like, very difficult to escape, but not necessarily impossible? So that, like, if you like, want to spend your resources to make it easier, you have that option, but if you don't, then you at least have the option to not do so. Maybe there's a warp tile out of the map, or out of the room, but it's guarded by a very strong boss, for instance. You know, that could be kind of interesting, right? Maybe you could even intentionally get yourself caught in that trap to kill the boss and make it easier for you going forward in case you accidentally do it. That could be interesting. Those are some good gameplay dynamics that could lead to decision making rather than just pointlessly, cruelly, and just so fucking blatantly screwing over your players who are trying to have fun. What is fun about this setup? Who liked this? Who put their fucking, their thief that had the lockpick they really needed on a warp tile by accident, and because they just used their last rescue staff, they're just fucked. They're just, especially considering you can soft lock at the very last chapter if you don't have enough ways to open doors or enough warp stabs and other, types of stabs to get characters into rooms. We'll talk about that in a minute, but like, why is it designed this way? What was Kaga thinking? This is just the worst fucking map to ever exist. It's so bad. It's just so blatantly mean-spirited. I can't think of any other word for it. It is I cannot fathom any reason you would design this map this way unless your goal was explicitly to piss off the people playing the game. And I mean, I've ranted a lot about this game. I do actually think that I like this chapter more than a couple others in the game. I think it's better than Chapter 4, personally. And I would also probably put it above maybe Chapter 22. But it is down there, not just in this game, but in the entire series. It's probably within the bottom 5 or 10 maps of the entire series. I hate it. It sucks. But here we are, So I've talked about all the disparate elements, but what exactly is your goal here? So you start off in 2 different locations. It's pretty easy to join your group up, so that's what I did. I just got them together pretty early on. You kill the enemies as you go through. There are sorcerers that spawn and then rewarp to you. That's kind of annoying, but it's fine. It doesn't really matter. They're pretty easy to take care of, so you just get rid of them. And then your goal is the center of the map, where those guys shooting status stabs are, has an escape point. So if you make it there, you can kill all the guys and then you can escape. There are 2 major side objectives, though. There is a treasure room with 3 treasure chests. They have a stab booster, I think it's like a power ring, a master seal, and then some other thing, I don't remember. I didn't bother with any of them. They weren't useful. I didn't need them, so I just said fuck it. Especially since I was pretty down atrocious for lockpick uses, so I really didn't need to bother opening another door that I didn't need to. And then the other major side objective is you can rescue Avel. If you have the Kia staff on Sarah and you use it on Avel, she, it reverses the petrification and she can rejoin you. There are a few conversations that you can have with Marita and Leaf. And at the end of the chapter, we do a whole big reunion scene, which is great, and I'll talk about that later. So I like Avel, and I think that this chapter is worth doing if you want to see like all the story content, because there's a lot of really good stuff here. But the chapter, but the conversation with Avel and Leaf is quite good. I didn't see the conversation with Marita and Leaf. I should take a look at that real quick, or Marita and Avel rather. Let me take a look at that. Yeah, so basically you talk to her with either Leaf or Marita, and they both have very similar conversations. Essentially, they say, like, oh, we missed you so much. They, get all teary about it. And it's made clear that Avel kind of just fell asleep and has no idea how long she's been out of it for. When she comes to, she kind of assumes that she's right there in the gladiator pit fighting Raytrick and everybody else, she thinks that nothing has happened, whereas in reality, it's been a full year since the last time that these characters have all seen each other. So once Abel gets caught back up to speed, they are like, okay, well we can catch up later. Let's get out of here. And then you make it to the middle, and you escape. Fun fact: this is the only chapter in the entire game where Abel has an escape quote. I don't even remember what it is. It's very mundane. She just says like, "Don't do anything reckless, Leaf," or something like that. And then once you get everybody out and get Leaf out at the end, the chapter is over. And the ending cutscene is actually quite sweet. It is essentially a reunion between all of the characters, as I mentioned, who matter to Abel, basically. There's Leaf, Merida, I think Finn is there, Dagdar, all of the Fianna Freeblades. I think Tanya shows up at some point, and then I think that's it. Oh, and then Galsus at the very end. So there's quite a few characters here. Most of them have pretty mundane things. I mean, like, I say mundane, right? Like, I don't mean that as a criticism. It's very sweet. It's very heartwarming. But it's all stuff you would expect for the most part, right? It's like, oh, we missed you so much. We're glad to have you back. Thank you for everything that you did while I was away. All that good stuff. The main two I want to talk about are Leaf and Galsus, because both of them have really interesting things to say. So, I mentioned way back at the beginning, I think in chapter 6, around that point when Abel first got turned to stone, I had not realized, I was unclear on what the relationship between Abel and Leaf was. I did not realize that Leaf had been with Abel for, I think they say 3 years. So, when he got all teary and said, like, she's like a mother to me, I kind of raised an eyebrow and said, well, that's a little bit extreme. Weren't they only together for like 6 months? But no, it turns out it was 3 full years, which is quite a long time. So I totally understand where Leaf is coming from more now. And they just have a really genuine heart-to-heart about, like, everything that she means to him. She gave him a sense of security. Like, the most I guess, positive experience he's had in his entire childhood was with the Fianna Freeblades and growing up with Merida and Nana and Finn like a father and Abel like a mother. They really gave him that sense of family that he never had before. And it's honestly, like, I didn't feel a lot about it, like, emotionally in the moment, other than, oh, this is very sweet. But talking about it, I'm actually starting to get a little teary-eyed because it's genuinely quite heartwarming and extremely sweet, I guess, is just the best way to put it. I did lie because I actually also want to mention Finn's conversation with her here, because other than the generic, like, oh, it's good to see you again, all that, Abel mentions, I think during Leaf's conversation, that she has amnesia, which has not come up before. Leaf is hearing about it for the first time, I believe, and so is Finn. And Finn, at this point, says, okay, well, now that I know you have amnesia, there is something that I need to tell you, because I think you are most likely a woman by the name of Brigid. Brigid was a person who we fought alongside with. She has major Ulir holy blood, and she used a bow, and she was just like, she was pretty awesome and kick-ass, just talking her up, making her sound really cool. And he says, like, basically, I don't think he says this explicitly, but the implication, I think, is Finn had thought this, but then assumed, well, if she really was Brigid, she would have said something about it, right? Like, there's no way that she would have just, like, not said anything, so it's probably just a coincidence. But then once Finn realizes that she has amnesia, he's like, oh, well, maybe she just doesn't know. And so he decides to tell her. And Avel's reaction to all this is extremely interesting, because she says, if I had holy blood, I would have a brand of some kind, right? Well, I don't have one. So that can't be me. You must be thinking of somebody else. And there's a lot of interesting things you can take out of that, right? So, first of all, I guess my initial question would be, how does she know that? Is that like common knowledge? I mean, I think it kind of is, right? I don't know if everybody knows it, but it seems like a fair few people are familiar with the concept of, like, holy blood leaving a brand and making it clear, like, on your body that you belong to this bloodline. So I could buy that she just like heard it somewhere. But the fact that she doesn't know can be interpreted, or the fact that she says she doesn't have one can be interpreted in a lot of interesting ways. I think the most likely explanation is that she's just lying, which is really cool, right? Because, and again, I'm reading between the lines here significantly, but to me, this signifies that she loves her life as Avel so much. She cares about all the people in her life. She loves Marita more than anything. She loves Leaf. She loves the Fianna Freeblades. She loves all these guys. And for Finn to come and say, hey, you have this entire other family that you are not, that you left behind, like unintentionally, and that you are the heir to this bloodline. And she decides in that moment, I don't care. That's not me anymore. This is me. I'm Avel. I'm not Bridget. I don't care who I used to be. I'm Avel now. And that's the end of the story. So she lies and says that she doesn't have a brand to kind of stop him from bothering. Which also opens up the implication of like, well, if she does have a brand on her body, surely she would have seen it at some point, even after she lost her memory. So, did she always know? Or did she always suspect, at least? That's a possibility. There's also, essentially the idea that maybe she doesn't have a brand, in which case maybe she's just, we do see, if you want to consider later game lore to be canon, we do see that sometimes the brands don't always pass down properly. We see it with Lissa in Awakening. Her brand does not manifest, and she worries about being adopted, basically. But then when she finds out that Owain, her son, has it, she feels very happy because, it kind of legitimizes her. Like he got the brand through her. So even though it didn't show up, she clearly still has that blood in her veins. So maybe it's a situation similar to that where she doesn't have the brand. And I guess like this is the least likely explanation, but she might also just not be Bridget. Like Finn might just be wrong. I've always assumed that she was Bridget, and I think like basically everybody agrees. Like I don't think there's a single person who thinks that she's not Bridget. But I do wonder if this isn't contradicting anything that we already know. I do wonder if maybe it is just a really fucking crazy coincidence. It's probably not. I do think that the fact that she's just lying is both much more likely and much more characterful and interesting. But I don't want to overrule that possibility because I think that's also kind of interesting in a way. Like, what if, we don't know for sure. And then the final conversation here that she has that I want to talk about is the conversation with Galzus, where, he basically meets her, thanks her for everything she's done to raise Marita, and then basically says, I think that you should continue to raise Marita and to continue to be her mother. And, I mean, I don't know, like, maybe it's just me, but usually when I see scenes like this in media, like, I can imagine how they're gonna go, right? Like, Avel's gonna be like, oh, no, like, you're her true father, you should be with her, and you should, like, raise her and be the father that she never had, and rekindle that lost relationship, like, yada, yada, yada. But Avel here says, yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm her mother now. Deal with it. Which I just think is fucking awesome. Like, that's so cool. That's a really great character moment for Avel, and for a character who, like, going back to the first episode, I called her not very interesting. I'm definitely eating my words here because just banger character moment after banger character moment coming from Avel in this scene. And I just think it's so cool. Like, I like Avel a lot. She went from being a very forgettable nothing character to me to being one of my favorites in the whole game in one chapter, which is just awesome. And it's probably the only positive thing I have to say about 24X. With all of that done, we have Avel back in hand. We're ready to go. Avel's, by this point in the game, her stats are really bad, so she's sitting on the bench for the last chapter. But speaking of which, we're going to go ahead and get into Endgame, which is called Sworn Upon a Sword. So this is our Endgame map for FE5, and I actually think that this series has pretty consistently good Endgame maps. I think there are only a few that I would consider to be bad, and this is not one of them. I think that this chapter is pretty good all around. I actually think it might be one of my favorites in the game. Barring a few minor complaints, actually major complaints if I'm going to be honest, but I still liked it anyway. So, the setup is basically that you are split across 6 different groups, and there are 6 kind of rooms, chambers, whatever you want to call them, that are built around this map. And then in the center, there is a smaller room, or I guess it's the same size, but it's in the center of the map, and that is where the final boss is. And in order to get to him, you need to go into each of the 6 outlying chambers and kill a boss that is in there, or a mini-boss, and stand on the tile that they are standing on. And then once all 6 tiles are stood on at the same time, the middle room will open. Now, it seems simple enough, but there are a few things that complicate this. First of all, the bosses, or I guess, again, the mini-bosses, I should say, that you need to fight in order to accomplish this, are the Dead Lords, or at least 6 of them. There are, I believe, 12 total, so there's only half of them here. And this chapter actually gives us a lot of new insight into how the Dead Lords, like what they are, who they are, what they are, because I believe in FE4 all that was said about them is that they're like super soldiers, but maybe it said something about them being like undead, but we really don't get a lot of information here. And in one of the neatest little touches in the game, the Dead Lords in this chapter can potentially have the appearance of characters that you have lost throughout the game. These changes in appearance are purely for flavor. It does not give them any extra stats, any extra skills, so you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, but it kind of gives some insight into the lore and the story. So here we go. So Tigress, who is a warrior, can potentially be Dagdar. Canis, who is a sage, can potentially be Sarah. Bovis, who is a mercenary, or I guess a hero, depending on the translation you use, can be Galzus. Porcus, who is a thief fighter or a rogue, can be Lippis. Draco, who is a sniper, can be Avel. And then there's Moose, who is a baron, who is actually always Raedric. Jesus Christ. I don't know how much of that cap I'm going to leave in there, but I just blanked on his name for like a solid 10 seconds. What the fuck? Alright, so Raedric is always going to be Moose. So I guess implication is the wrong word. It's I guess it's not outright stated, so it is technically an implication. Characters who have died become the Dead Lords, basically. Or I guess to be more accurate, Dead Lords are crafted by the Loptir Empire. They say so at the beginning of this chapter from, it seems, the corpses of once living people. So Veld has successfully made one out of Raedric. And I guess I should start, I skipped over some stuff at the beginning. It's pretty boring. Basically, Manfroy shows up, who, I hate Manfroy, so this is not like a good thing for me. But Manfroy shows up and says, hey, you're doing a really bad job killing this kid. And Veld's like, hey, get off my dick, man. He's pretty strong. And Manfroy's like, yeah, I guess you got a point. So I'm going to give you 5 Dead Lords. And Veld's like, oh, okay, well, I just made one too. So with that, we have 6. That's pretty good. And they're guarding some seals. So Raedric will always be there no matter what. But then if those characters that I mentioned earlier have died or have been captured and not rescued over the course of the game, then they will be Dead Lords here. They actually, kind of eerily and ominously, if they are not recruited at any point, then they also become Dead Lords. So if you didn't recruit Lippis in Chapter 2X, then he will be a Dead Lord in this chapter. I think a lot of people are actually going to get the Draco, the sniper, be Avel, because I'm pretty sure that she is Avel if you don't save her in the previous chapter. So they have a pretty quick turnaround on these guys. I don't know what's up with that. Anyway, I think to me the most ominous one is Sarah, because we know that Manfroy was keeping her in kind of a secure location, and that, her retainers, I guess would be the right word, had a pretty vested interest in keeping her safe. But if you think about this, it becomes kind of spooky, right? Because like, why did they have such a vested interest in keeping her safe? Why were they keeping her locked up there? Was this always what they were going to do with her? Because if so, that's pretty screwed up. And in a good way. Like I think this is good. This is good, ominous villain setup. Pretty much the best that the Loptier Empire ever gets, because they're either just comically evil with no redeeming qualities, or the game is trying to make you feel bad for them, and neither of those landed for me very well. But I think this more kind of subtly ominous, like they were keeping a little girl locked up to use her in super soldier experiments, and Manfroy's own granddaughter for that matter. So I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. Obviously, not that they were doing that, but like the way that the game, sets them up here and makes them come across as more ominous. So you need to get into each of these rooms. Here's the problem: all of them are locked, which makes sense, I guess. Like, why wouldn't they lock them? They don't want you to get in. But the problem with that is it is possible to soft lock at the very end if you don't have enough ways of opening doors. It is a very common strategy from people who are familiar with Thracia to buy a bunch of door keys towards the end of the game to make sure that they have enough to get through this map. Of course, if you have a lockpick, then that is also something you can do. And then, worst case scenario, you have a bunch of warp staffs that you can use, most likely. I used warp a lot to get around because I had one door key and then maybe 3 uses of the lockpick. So I was playing it pretty close there, but I did have enough warp to make it work. I had like a rewarp staff in there as well. So I was okay. Like, I wasn't exactly close to soft locking, I wouldn't say. But and I think most people are probably going to have the necessary resources. But that is, I mean, I've said this a lot, even in this episode. I just think that's bullshit game design, and I'm not going to harp on about it because you guys already know my stance on this. I think that if you can be, these aren't resources that I don't think would be reasonable to expect the player to always have at the end of the game, right? Then you just lose, and you just have to reset the whole game. Or, well, I guess maybe not the whole game, potentially the whole game. But like, if you have a save from a previous chapter, you can always go back there and see if you can pull something off. But I don't know. It just seems kind of fucked up to me. But what do I know? Hi, once again, me from editing. Forgot to mention this, and I want to be fair because I don't want to criticize this game in cheap ways. I did forget to mention that you do have door keys on this map. They are locked behind the doors, so you have to be able to open one door or get into one room somehow, some way, and then from there you can work it out. So it's not as bad as I made it sound. Just wanted to make that clear. It's still annoying. I still don't like it, but it's not really that bad. Beyond that, though, if you put that aside, this is actually a really, really, really fun map. The bosses are all pretty strong, especially Elf and Galzus. I don't know why I said what. Wrong on both counts there. Okay, so I said Galzus when I meant to say Bovis, I think is what his name is, and I said Elf when I meant to say Canis. Elf was her name in the previous translation of this game. They were, I believe, in Japanese. They are named after like numbers in German. So there's like an eins, zwei, drei. My pronunciation in foreign languages is terrible, but yeah, I don't know what number Elf would be, since the pattern here seems pretty random. But in English, in most English translations, they are named after the Chinese zodiac in Latin, I believe it is. I might have already mentioned this in the FE4 endgame episode, but if you hear me call Canis Elf a couple times. That's because I'm used to her under her old name. Only her, really. I think the others are pretty easy to remember, but Elf is kind of a meme just because of how fucking strong she is. She has all of Sarah's skills. I think she even also has Paragon, which is weird because she's like, even if she's not Sarah, even if she's just like her normal morph form or whatever you want to call it, she can have Paragon. Yeah, she has Paragon. So, and then she has Berserk. She has Wrath, which is really fucking scary. Adept. She's very, very strong. I just killed her with Marita because my Marita is a fucking god. But, you know, you might struggle with her. Galzus, again, Bovis is a little bit of a different story. So all of these guys are on, I believe, what did I say it was called? Mana Stone. That gives them plus 10 magic. So killing him with a like Asvel or someone is pretty tough. It is doable, but it's a little bit tough. And then just like his physical stats are through the roof. So even if you try to 1v1 him with the real Galzus, you might struggle a little bit. What I ended up doing is all of these guys, I don't think there's any stat variance on these guys. All of the physical people have 9 magic plus 10 from the Mana Stone. That is 19, which means that if you have a capped magic cleric or somebody like that, or if you just use like a ensorcel staff, then you will have enough magic to put them to sleep, or to silence them, or to berserk them, or something. So that's what I elected to do for a couple of these guys. Porcus is pretty tough. Bovis is very tough. Draco, I think I also put to sleep, but that's not really necessary. Draco is like really, really weak. Tigress, I'm pretty sure I just killed with like Fergus, I want to say. And then Canis I got with Maria. So yeah, these guys are, you know, if you have status stabs at the end here, that's pretty good. Otherwise, like, and again, this is a key difference, right? I don't think it's impossible to kill these guys without using status stabs. I just think it's a lot harder, which is why I think this chapter is good, whereas I think chapter 22 kind of sucks. But, you know, again, I digress. There are a couple of anti-turtling incentives that the game tries to throw at you here. They're pretty easy to deal with, I would say. So they're not like super good anti-turtling incentives in my opinion, but they're trying, which is something I suppose. So first of all, there's a sorcerer in all 6 rooms, and they have Fenrir. And Fenrir, you know, this isn't a very big map, so Fenrir can reach pretty far, and it does a shitload of damage because they're on Mana Stone. So you got to make sure that you take them out pretty quickly, or else make sure that no one who can get one shot is in their range. So if you do that, that's pretty easy. And then I believe on turn 5, reinforcements start appearing from the 4 corners of the room. You can just look up where the reinforcement spots are and block them. That's pretty easy. And then the reinforcements stop once you open the middle door, so then you can move them off and not have any problem with that. So it's a straightforward concept, but your execution of it can be very complicated depending on the tools you have available. Personally, I had a lot of warp, but not a lot of door keys, so you saw a lot of me warping people in, you know, killing the dead lord inside and then maybe rescuing them out. That was pretty fun. You know, you could always just take the direct approach and walk up and open the door and just kill the guys inside. Oh, I should mention that moose, the Raedric morph. I keep calling them morphs. The Raedric Deadlord has the Loptir sword, so you do need to use the Bragi sword. I mean, I guess you don't have to. I think I either killed him or got very close to killing him with Galzus, because Galzus is just so fucking strong. So you don't necessarily need to bother with that. But the Loptir sword is pretty tough to deal with. So you might just, like, Leaf starts in front of him anyway, so you have a free way to get rid of Raedric as long as you can open the door. So once all those guys are gone, you stand on the tiles that they were on. They do move, so I guess theoretically you could stand on all 6 tiles without killing them. It seems pretty difficult, but I guess you could technically do it. Anyway, once that's all done, you stand on the 6 tiles, and the door opens in the middle, and Veld is there. Now Veld is surrounded by a few enemies. There are some berserkers who are actually there from the start, so if you want to, you know, I had Galzus work on killing those guys. They're pretty strong. I think they all have Wrath, but I had Galzus take care of it, so it wasn't a problem. And then once you open the door, there are 5 sorcerers. And they all have various stuff. They have like restore staves in case you try to silence them. I think a couple of them have Fenrir. They're not too difficult to take care of. And you know who else isn't too difficult to take care of is Veld. Veld himself is actually very, very easy. I killed him in, I believe, 1 round of combat with Merida. He's super easy. You don't have to try too hard to get rid of him. He is threatening because he can use, I believe, I didn't actually have it happen to me, but if I'm not mistaken, he has a spell called Petrify, which can turn you to stone. It is a 3 to 10 range weapon with 100 hits, so it's pretty accurate. And then I don't know what happens if you like end the map without like, I mean, you have the Kia staff, right? Like if you got Avel back, you have the Kia staff. So that's another reason to get it and do 24x, I suppose. So him turning someone to stone is not the end of the world, especially since, you know, theoretically, assuming you got Avel, you have 4 uses of the Kia staff left, and he should have 5 uses of his Petrify. So worst case scenario, there's only one person that is not getting revived after they get turned to stone. I don't know what happens to them. I assume that they just die, or they're considered dead in the credits. I'm not entirely sure, but you know, it's pretty easy to avoid that happening to you. It did not happen to me. I was able to take care of it without too much of a problem. And yeah, Veld's really easy. I think that the different approaches that Fire Emblem games take to making different bosses challenging is interesting. I think this is probably one of the better approaches that I've seen. Like, the boss itself is not difficult, but actually getting to it is quite difficult. And I think that works out pretty well. I also kind of like when they make the boss kind of like a multi-stage affair, kind of like what they do with Ashera. I quite like Ashera. I know a lot of people think she's bullshit. Personally, I think Ashera is a pretty good final boss. I think that sometimes they mess up horribly and make the final bosses way too strong. That would be the case for someone like Ashnerd in FE9 is only killable. In fact, not just killable. You can only damage him with like 3 characters. So it's really annoying. I don't like Ashnerd, but we'll talk about him when we get there, I suppose. So you do everything you need to do. You kill Veld. You have Leaf. This is a Seas map. This is not like most FE final bosses where it's a kill boss. This one is actually a Seas. I kind of had like a panic moment where I killed Veld. I was like, yeah, let's go. This is easy. And then, you know, the map didn't end, and there were still some enemies left alive that I was scared of. I was like, oh boy. But nothing ended up happening. I was fine. I did lose Lithis in this map to one of the berserkers. I did not realize their movement range was as high as it was, and he just got fucking owned. But it was fine. He had done everything he needed to do at that point, and he couldn't become a Deadlord. That'd be really funny if they could become a Deadlord like mid-map, but no, that's not what happens. But once you seize with Leaf, that's it. You've beaten the game. And there's a lot of cutscenes that I was actually in Discord voice chat with Spike finishing this game, so I didn't go through it in a lot of detail. So if you would give me a moment to just like read up on it, make sure I didn't miss anything important, I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so the idea here is that there's a whole bunch of scenes with different characters, depending on who's alive and who's dead and who's been captured and all that stuff. So I'm going to just go through them in order, and if there's anything that I want to talk about, I'll talk about it. So Leaf and August have a scene together. This is always going to be here because obviously August can't die, but he just talks to Leaf and says, oh, you know, I was helping you because, you know, my benefactor told me to. He doesn't say that it's Lewin, but you know, he says that. But then they decide that they're going to keep working together because they like each other and that they work well together. So Finn has a scene here. This scene isn't like very interesting. Although, okay. So this is actually a good place as any to talk about this. So this entire time I have been referring to Northern Thracia as the Manster District. And I have been describing it as being comprised of 3 major territories: Leinster, Manster, and Ulster. Now, I don't know where I got that from. Like, I thought it was in the game. Like, I thought I read about that somewhere, like, on the wiki or something like that. But I'm starting to think that I might have just made it up, because, first of all, it's never referred to anywhere as the Master District. But then also, it says here, Finn has a line that says, of the 4 kingdoms of North Thracia, Leinster, Ulster, Connaught, and Munster, or as they would be called now, Leinster, Ulster, Connaught, and Manster, as I've been referring to them. These are their new names, but I don't fuck with that. Change is bad. No, I don't like change. Go back. So I don't know where I got that from, but just so you know, if you've been listening to my bullshit about what this country is called and the things about it, then I just made it all up. So I don't know where that came from, but anyway, this scene between Leif and Finn is pretty sweet and pretty cute. It's just Leif thanking Finn for everything he's done. And they just have a very sweet relationship here. They do talk a little bit about uniting Thracia, and I guess I'll talk more about this in the next episode, because that's going to be the wrap up and final thoughts section. But there's a lot at the beginning of the game about, like, oh, maybe uniting Thracia is not... I don't think they ever say uniting Thracia is bad, but just more like they cast doubt on Quan and his, like, motivations for wanting to reunite Thracia and his methods. So I was hoping that there would be more of that kind of as the game went on, but it turns out there's less, and they don't really talk about it at all, I think, after Chapter 8, and Quan and the whole Leinster place is kind of only ever portrayed in a good light from that point onward, which is a shame, and I think maybe that might have been me reading a little bit too much into it. I'm bringing my own politics into this video game discussion, which, I mean, I don't think is bad necessarily. I think people who say that you should leave politics out of video games are fucking stupid, if you ask me. But I do think that I was reading some thoughts and ideas and concepts here that weren't necessarily there. I mean, like, they very explicitly call out Quan at a couple points, and say that he did not have the right idea of things, but they don't really go anywhere with it. So I guess I was just hoping that they would, is kind of what I'm trying to say. Anyway, the next scene is with Avel. She's going back to Fianna, because she still feels obligated to defend that section of the world and of Thracia, because, that she was she was the sole protector of it for so long, and she wants to go back to that life. And I think this kind of, like, further suggests that maybe she was lying about the whole not knowing who she was thing, or lying about not having the brand, at least, because, at the end of the day, she wants to be Avel, and she wants to do things the way she always has. Now, there is a scene here that I didn't get because it was with Miranda. If you remember, I had Miranda captured, and so to get 21X, and then I just left her behind because I don't like Miranda. So, so there's a scene here with Miranda that I did not get, and I have not read yet, so you're going to be getting my live reaction. So let's see. Okay, so this is just talking about, she apologizes to Leif, first of all, which is nice. But Leif says, no, that wasn't your fault, which is true. It wasn't her fault, but, it's still nice that she accepts a little responsibility for that. And then they talk for, like, a few paragraphs about an arranged marriage, because, like, I guess her advisors are telling her that she needs to marry Leif, and Leif doesn't even say no. He's just like, I got more stuff I gotta do, like, the war isn't over yet, but then afterward, maybe, which seems kind of weird, especially considering a scene we have coming up. It feels a bit odd that he wouldn't just reject her outright, especially since she's like, if you don't want to, that's fine, but I don't know. Anyway, Lenoan has a conversation. It's very short for the most part. It's just about how Tara is still under the control of the Empire. But then if Dean is also there, which he wasn't for me, so again, this is the first time I'm reading this, then you get more of a conversation. So Dean says that he's going to leave because he knows now that Leif's plan is to go fight Southern Thracia, and he doesn't want to fight his homeland, which seems reasonable to me. But Lenoan basically begs him to stay and says, like, I will give up everything, including Tara, to have you by my side. And Dean says, well, I can't argue with that. So he decides to stick around, I guess, supposedly. I like to headcanon that he comes back once he hears that Lenoan has been saved. I don't know. That's super copium. I understand that, but fuck it. It's my headcanon. You can't do anything about it. Okay, now this is the bread and butter here. This is like the major thing that happens in this conversation. Leaf and Nana basically confess their love to each other. If Marita is also there, then you see her kind of like egging Nana on, like, come on, go confess to him. Come on, you gotta do it, or else, you're never gonna have a better chance than this. So Nana goes over and she like tries to say it, but can't get the words out. But then Leaf basically just does it for her, which is, funny. I think, obviously their relationship is very cute. I don't really care about Nana at all. She is like the most boring character in all of Yggdrasil. I think she might actually be, because any characters that I liked less than her were just more boring. We're just like ones that I actively hated. Characters like Connemore and Reinhardt, Miranda, like those characters, I wouldn't describe them as boring. I would describe them as actively disliking them. Whereas Nana is just so forgettable. There's just nothing going on with her outside of this scene. Except, of course, the scene from FE4 where she and Ares, if they're married, talk about how they're cousins, and that's how that's pretty weird. And maybe, they don't really say anything beyond that. They're just like, oh, we're cousins and we're married. That's pretty fucking weird, right? And they're like, haha, yeah. One of the worst conversations in all of Fire Emblem. That you guys did get my live reaction for. I remember that very clearly, and that was very fun. So, I'm hoping to get more live reactions like that in the future, but the ones that we got here were pretty boring, so I guess you can't win them all. Anyway, this kind of goes back to what I was saying. Leaf in this conversation is very smooth and very very forthcoming with his feelings. He doesn't hesitate at all, so he's not kind of doing that like awkward bumbling anime protagonist thing where they're like, I guess, if you wanted to go out with me, it would be fine. No, he just says it. He just says it outright. Which is, first of all, kind of a nice change of pace. But then also kind of goes and says more about his conversation with Miranda. Like, he's not the type of person who has difficulty expressing his emotions. So, my best guess is that they did not want to write the conversation two different ways depending on if Nana was alive or dead. Because if she's dead, then it makes sense for Leaf to be considering Miranda's proposition here. But if she's alive, then it doesn't. So I guess they didn't want him to say like, oh, if she's alive, like, oh, I have feeling for somebody else, and then if she's dead, to actually like think about it. So they kind of wrote something that vaguely works for both, but in my opinion doesn't really work for Nana being alive at all, in my opinion. But anyway, that's not the hill I'm going to die on. That's a very minor thing. Ultimately, I like these scenes a lot. I think most of them are pretty good. They don't really do any like major characterization or anything, but they're just a nice little way to wrap up the game. Oh, and then Seliph shows up and they kind of burrow out for a little bit and say like, hey, we're best friends now. We're closer than brothers, even though we've met for like 2 days. But there's like some stuff in there about, like our fathers before us were best friends, so we should be best friends too, and all that good stuff. So it's a nice little bow to end on. Technically, the story isn't over. We see that it continues throughout chapters 9, 10, and Endgame of FE4. But we all know how that ends already, and it ends generally pretty positively. I guess unless Leaf dies or Nana dies in FE4, that could be pretty bad. These characters have a pretty happy ending overall, I would say. And that's the end of the game. I forget the exact order of events here. I'm pretty sure you get the character endings first. A lot of them are pretty mundane. There's not really any interesting ones. There's a lot of them that imply like romance between characters, but they don't have paired endings yet in this series, so they can't do I guess FE4 had paired endings depending on who got married. So I don't know why they couldn't do it here as well, but basically, there's a lot of like, oh, this person married so and so, but they don't actually say the name. I'm trying to think of a good example. I think, unfortunately, the only example that can come to my mind right now is Connemore. Or no, it's Miranda. Miranda's ending says that she marries like a knight or something like that, and the implication is that it's Connemore. But since Connemore can die, they didn't want to write a different ending, so they just said, well, maybe it's just some other knight, I guess. Oh yeah, that was the other example I was thinking of. Is Fred and Olwen. Fred's ending says that he marries like a noblewoman, and obviously the only person that would reasonably be is Olwen, at least of the characters that we see. But if Olwen dies, then I guess it's implied that he just meets some other random noblewoman and marries her. I don't know. This isn't like a criticism or anything. I just think it's interesting, that the lengths that they went to avoid writing multiple endings for characters, depending on who is alive and who is not. I can't think, I have to go through like them all one by one later, and maybe I'll add something in here, but I really don't remember any of them being very interesting. I got a few characters who died, so I didn't see literally every ending, but I'll go through and I'll check them out later. And if there's any interesting ones, I'll you'll hear maybe a little bit of a cut, and I'll be talking about them right now. Yeah, okay, so I was going to do a bit where I was like, oh, well, I guess, you didn't hear anything, so they must have all been boring. But no, I do actually have 4 endings that I would like to talk a little bit about in more depth. First of all, real quick, I want to mention Avel's ending, which is that she eventually gets her memories back, more or less. They talk about some kind of pact that she made with the dragons, which I don't know what that's about. It's probably something similar to what's going on with Lewin. I don't know. They don't really go into any kind of detail. But basically, that eventually runs out, and she gets her memories back. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I did mention, like, oh, is it possible that she isn't actually Bridget, and that it's just a crazy coincidence? Now, I was 99% like, yeah, of course she's Bridget, because what would be the fucking point? But I liked the idea of there being some kind of ambiguity and room for speculation and interpretation. But no, I was just wrong. And then also, I didn't mention this during the Endgame chapter, but it's pretty heavily implied, if not outright stated, that she's Bridget in that as well, because the Dead Lord that she could take the place of is a sniper, which is what Bridget is. So it wouldn't make any sense for her to not be Bridget after that. So anyway, there goes my speculation. I think her being Bridget works better for the story anyway. I just wanted to make sure that I got ahead of that, because otherwise I'm going to get people yelling at me about it probably. So anyway, moving on. The next one that we have is Liphus. Liphus is a character that I've talked about a little bit, especially when he first joined, and I talked about how he was kind of just like this, piece of shit, and probably just like morally one of the worst characters in the entire series. It's very often that you get a straight up bad person to join your group in the same way that he does. And I speculated of like, well, he considered turning Leaf into the Empire for some kind of reward, but he never did it. So maybe there was some kind of off-screen development. But for the most part, it stayed headcanon until I read his character ending, which essentially says that he actually took up a job as a politician, basically, or some kind of like government official. And he was only in that position for a very brief time. During that time, he ordered basically the pirates of the Corsair Isles, where he was at before, to just be completely wiped out. And after that was accomplished, he just disappeared and was never heard from again. So I think that's a pretty interesting ending, because, it implies that there is some level of character development going on. Or, I guess the alternative is that he didn't want anyone to associate them with him. But if it was for, like, power reasons, then you would think that he would have just, like, stayed in that position after that. I choose to believe that he grew a conscience over his time with Leaf and decided to, do the right thing and kind of, like, stamp out the bandits that he had been leading this whole time. I don't know. It's up to interpretation, but that's how I choose to feel about it. Fergus's ending is pretty interesting because, first of all, it kind of just, like, it says like, oh, there was a lot of speculation about who Fergus was after the war ended, and then they propose a couple of ideas of who he might have been. One of them being that he is the illegitimate son of the quote legendary knight Fergus, or sorry, the legendary knight Beowulf. So I forgot that they had just like spelled that out explicitly as a possibility in the character ending. I thought it was kind of just like people had to figure it out by the fact that he could use the Beow sword. But the other thing that they mention is that he might have been a long lost prince of like Frisia's royal family. I have no idea what the fuck that's about, because that is never implied at any point. He doesn't look anything like, most of the people from Frisia have purple hair, and he doesn't look anything like that. The only thing that I can think of is that it would explain why he can use the Bragi sword if he has, like, Tordo Holy Blood. But, I mean, I don't know. There's nothing else in the game to suggest that possibility. So I don't know where they're pulling that from. Might be a translation thing. I'm not sure. But anyway, I thought that was interesting and wanted to bring that up. And then finally we have Olwen, who the only thing that I have to say about Olwen's ending is that whenever she thinks about Reinhardt, according to this ending, she felt a mixture of pity and anger, which is, I mean, I think it's kind of an indication that maybe Reinhardt isn't meant to be seen as sympathetic, because she doesn't feel like remorse, she doesn't feel like longing, she just kind of feels kind of bad for him and angry about it. So maybe he isn't meant to be seen as sympathetic. Maybe I jumped the gun a little bit on that one. Possible. And then the ending kind of fucking goes off the deep end at that point, because it says because of how she felt about Reinhardt, she then chose to marry someone very unremarkable, which is implied to be Fred. There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, that's just kind of mean to Fred. I mean, I don't think Fred's that bad. He's like a pretty important knight. I guess not important, maybe is the wrong word, but he's like a high-ranking knight who was her attendant. So I don't know what's so unremarkable about that. But also, why does her relationship with Reinhardt have anything to do with who she marries? Is this one of those like, oh, there's a weird fixation on incest in this series, and I'm wondering if this is meant to be like, oh, did she have feelings for him? Possibly, but this is the only place where that's ever implied. So I'm going to choose to believe that that's not the case, and if it is, Kaga can fuck off, because I don't care. Alright. Those are the only endings that I had to talk about, so I'm going to cut back to the main episode now. Enjoy the rest of it. Anyway, moving on. Then we got my turn counts, which were very funny. Okay, full disclosure. I do not consider myself to be very good at Fire Emblem. I've admitted that on multiple occasions. When a map is hard, sometimes I turtle. Sometimes I turtle for a really long time. And unless the game gives me a more interesting alternative, I'm not gonna apologize for that. As I said, I finished this game in VC with Spike, and he said, maybe you didn't have fun with this game because you turtled the shit out of it. And I was like, well, that's possible, and I definitely think that's a reasonable criticism of my playstyle, but I also think that if the game's letting me turtle, and it's making turtling the most viable option, then, I don't want to turtle. I don't find turtling fun at all. It's boring. I'd much rather try risky strats and try out things that are more interesting and fun. But, if I'm gonna have to reset the whole map because of some bullshit Thracia mechanic, then I'm not gonna bother. So, we'll see. And I think the other thing, right, about that, too, is that I play most Fire Emblem games in that way. I don't turtle, every map. There are some maps where I'm able to beat them pretty quickly. But I think that, I'm generally a slower player. I take my time. I don't take a lot of unnecessary risks unless I'm, especially if I'm not playing with save states. And Yeah, I mean, I generally just don't play very fast. It's just not how I play these games for the most part, and this is the only game that I feel this strongly about disliking, except for Gaiden. So I don't know. I definitely don't think that this is a problem specific to this game. I do think that this game exacerbates it because my basically the way I would explain it is that my response to bullshit is to turtle, especially if I am able to do so. So like ballista in this game do a billion million damage, and I'm not gonna waste the warp staff to go and kill them because why would I do that? You know, if I had spent too many warp staffs over the course of the game, I wouldn't have had enough to beat endgame because this game is terribly designed. So basically what I did for pretty much any map with ballista was one by one, I would put a tanky unit in the range of the ballista and I would just spend 10 turns getting rid of all the bolts because that's the only way that I could progress and feel confident that I was going to win, basically. I'm sure there's other ways I could have done it, but it's just, I just don't find it engaging to play fast in this game. It doesn't make me feel good or accomplished. It just makes me feel like I'm getting screwed over by the game. So, I don't know. This isn't me trying to be like defensive or anything. I mean, it is a little bit. I can't lie. I'm going to be honest. I did get a little defensive when he said that. But I also think that I think it's justified. I really do. Like, I don't find this game engaging to play quickly on most maps. So we'll see if anything changes in the later games. The games become much easier from this point onward. I would say that Thracia is even not blind. I would say that it's one of the harder Fire Emblem games. Because there's a lot of things in this game that you just can't mitigate properly, even if you know about it. So, or I guess I should say, it's one of the harder Fire Emblem games if you're playing it straight, right? But I wasn't warp skipping, so I had to like perfect example, right? Chapter 21. I spent a ton of turns on Chapter 21 because there's a shitload of ballista, there's a shitload of strong reinforcements, and if I was very much at risk of overextending and dying very easily because this game just throws a lot of shit at you like that. But most people would, like, in any other playthrough that I was doing of this game, that shit would have been over on turn 1. Like, it would have been the easiest warp skip of my fucking life. But I didn't do that. And so it ended up being like 50 turns or some shit like that. There were a couple maps where it was like over 100. It was like Chapter 22 was like, I want to say it was like 115 or something like that. And then there was one, I cannot remember for the life of me which map it was. I remember being surprised because I didn't think I took that long on the map. That was like 130 or 140, something like that. I have no idea what map it was. I mean, I can always go back and check. In fact, you know what? Yep, I'm going to do that right now. I have time. Okay, so I found it out. It was Chapter 17B, which is the one with the cliff where you just bait the ballista. Like, that's what I did. I literally went to every ballista one by one and just baited all the ballista bolts. Oh, no. Okay. I remember what it was. That was the map where I fed Shannon. That was the map where I spent like a bunch of turns grinding up Shannon. Or Shanam, I should say. That is what it was. So, and that combined with the ballista made it way longer than it needed to be. Okay, yep, I remember now. So, yeah. So the only map that I legitimately took over 100 turns on for like because I couldn't beat it otherwise was Chapter 22. And even then, like, I struggled a lot, so I just don't like Chapter 22. Anyway, as you can imagine, my tactics ranking was E. They don't give like a breakdown of the different types of ranking in this game. At least not that I could see. So I just got one overall ranking that I assume was for tactics, and it was E, the worst possible one. Which, yep, okay, that's fair. I'm not gonna complain about that one. Okay. I think that's about everything that I had to say about this game. Until we get to our next episode, which is the final thoughts wrap-up episode as we did with FE4. We're already at 2.5 hours by recording time. I don't know how long it's going to be when it's all cut down, but I think I've gone on quite long enough. So let's cut it here and move on to our end of episode segments, starting with, of course, the map gauntlet. This one's a little tricky, actually, because I liked both Chapter 24 and Endgame a lot, so I wasn't quite sure what I would settle on for this, but I think I actually like Endgame more by a fair bit. I would say Endgame is like probably my top 5 maps in the game. If you put aside, like, so I know I'm being a hypocrite, right? Because I did complain about the door key softlock shit, right? This was just one of those maps though where like I had enough fun with it personally where I was able to just be like, fuck it. I had enough fun with it where I was able to put aside my obvious disdain for the game design. And I think that that's fine, right? Like, I'm not able to do that for every chapter, but I do think that for most, I'm able to, if I just have a genuinely good time, even if I know that there's a lot of bullshit going on, I can just say, fuck it, it was fine, I had fun, I liked the map. So, I'm going to say Endgame for this one. I guess Chapter 24 is a little bit more fair, but I also think it was a little bit less fun. So, take your pick. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, Uncle Ben. Chapter 19 is better than both of them. Yeah, I mean, Chapter 19, I've said going in, was probably going to be my favorite map in the game. It is definitely a top-tier map for me in the entire series. And unsurprisingly, my opinion has not changed. So we're 2 for 2 on my expected favorite map in the game going in being my favorite map at the end. Chapter 3 of FE4, and then Chapter 19 of FE5. So we'll see if that continues. I don't really know what my favorite map in FE6 is off the top of my head. I'll have to think about it. I'll probably by the time we get to FE6 episode 1, I'll know for sure. But yeah, anyway, I had a good time with this map, but it was still not better than Chapter 19. Now it's time for the news. And honestly, so there is a lot of news. Like, I'm not going to say there's not a lot of news. The problem is, it's a lot of pre-release info on Engage. So there's a lot of, like, new stuff coming out about it, about how some of the game mechanics work. And to be quite honest, I haven't really been keeping up with it all that well. So I'm going to hop on Serenus Forest, and see what I can find out, because I do think that there's some stuff here that's worth talking about. I get, like, my thing is, right, like, as much as I want to cover that stuff, I also think that, if you're plugged into the Fire Emblem community enough to be listening to this podcast, you're probably also familiar with, like, Mecha and Gast Station, or Fargast, I think is his name now. So you have resources available to you. I'm not under the delusion that anyone is relying on this podcast for major Fire Emblem news. That's why I kind of like talking about some of the more minor stuff. What I did want to talk about, and actually what I'm going to pause the episode right now, probably for, in my time, several hours, because I want to talk a lot about FEE3. Because there's some really cool stuff in there, but I need to go catch up on all that stuff. So I'll be back at some point. I don't know when, but I'll figure it out. So, but there is one thing I do want to say about Engage before we get into the other stuff, which is that apparently I don't know like what the context here is, but I guess people have found out that some maps from Engage are designed to be in line with maps from previous games, and one of them, if you can fucking believe it, is Chapter 22 of FE5, which is hysterical to me. Really frustrating, although I like Chapter 22, like if you took away Reinhardt, not even Reinhardt, if you took away the leadership stars, or you just made everyone have like normal levels of leadership stars, then suddenly that map becomes like perfectly fine. Totally okay. And you also need to take away Reinhardt's movement stars. Those are the only things. Alrighty, I am back, and as I predicted, it has been several hours, I think about 3 or 4, since I recorded the last section, so I went through every single video on the playlist FEE3 2022. I did not watch all of every video. In fact, I skimmed through most of them, to be completely honest. But if I hadn't, I would have been doing that for days, because there are exactly 76 videos in that playlist. Not all of them are of hacks. Some of them are of like new hacking tech, some advancements made in like animation and in what's the program, FE Builder? Yeah, FE Builder. So there's some stuff on that. But I went through every single video, and I went through and wrote down every game that really caught my attention and that I plan to keep an eye on and eventually play. Now, I'm only going to be I wanted to only talk about 5, but that was impossible. There are way too many cool-looking games here to only talk about 5 of them. So instead, I settled for 10, and even then, I had to cut out one of the ones that I wanted to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and give that one a shout-out right here. Fire Emblem Starlit Souls was one that I thought was interesting, but between all of these 11, I think it was the one that I had the least to say about. It just looked pretty cool, and I plan to check it out at some point, but I'm not going to talk about it in any amount of depth, so go watch that video if you want to hear more about it. So the remaining 10, some of them are pretty easy to explain, some of them are maybe a bit more complicated, but I'm going to start with one of the first videos on the playlist, actually, Fire Emblem Alethea, I believe is how it's pronounced. This one just seems like a really cool standard hack. Like it doesn't really seem to have any kind of gimmick or, and it doesn't seem to have anything that's like crazy. I mean, I don't know how to word this without actually without making it sound like I'm insulting the game, but it just seems like a pretty standard hack, but done very, very well. It's like a lot of these hacks, and I want to make this clear. Every hack that I went through looked really cool in its own way. Some of them didn't look like they would appeal to me personally, but I definitely respect the effort behind all of them, and I would say the majority, if not all of them, looked quite good. I think they're all genuinely great. It's just a matter of what appeals to your sensibilities as a player. But one common, I guess, criticism I had just, skimming through all these trailers is that a lot of them really try to reinvent the wheel, both mechanically and aesthetically, and I don't think that that's necessarily the direction that I enjoy seeing in ROM hacks. I think a lot of hacks try way too hard to make the games stand out and pop, and that's great and all, and I understand why they do that. But to me, it just feels like, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think Alethea, from what I saw, it seemed like it was going with that mentality. It seems like a pretty standard Fire Emblem game. I mean, it has some nice animations. The menus all looked great, and it seems like it has its own unique flair for sure. Other than like a couple minor things, it seems pretty indistinguishable from just a regular GBA Fire Emblem game in a good way. It does have dismounting as an option, and it seems pretty well balanced. So I think that's kind of its main claim to fame is that it brings back dismounting, which is something that a lot of ROM hacks do. I think even the developer in that trailer there was like a quote from the developer that even says that. A lot of hacks do dismounting, but it's interesting to see how it's implemented here, I guess. And obviously I haven't played any of these except actually one, which I will talk about. But actually a couple. I'll talk about any of the ones that I've played, but I have not played this one. And but I plan to. It looks really good. It looks like it was about I think they said 20 to 25 planned chapters, and they have 14 done, give or take. So it's about halfway to 2/3 of the way through being done. So that one's pretty good. I didn't check all of these to see how complete they all were, but most of them seemed either close to being done or done. But yeah. Anyway, the next one I wanted to talk about, I kind of cheated here and combined two, but they're very similar. There was a third one as well, but basically these are GBA remakes or remakes of other Fire Emblem games in the GBA engine. So the three that I saw, and there might be more that I'm forgetting about, but the three that I saw were the Shadows of Valentia remake in the GBA engine called Sacred Echoes. There was an FE5 remake in the GBA engine called FE5 AD, which I assume stands for Advanced. and then there was an FE1/11 remake called FE Dark Dragon Revived or something like that. That one I think so. That one looks really good too. I want to talk more about the first two though, because I think personally I like Shadow Dragon. I think it's a little bit of a hot take. I think Shadow Dragon is a good game, and I don't think it necessarily needs a GBA style remake in the same way that I think Echoes and FE5 kind of would benefit from it. But I don't think it's a bad idea by any means. It actually looked quite good, but I guess I'm just not as personally invested in that one, but it does seem pretty good. So if that sounds interesting to you, by all means, go check it out. Now, Sacred Echoes and FE5 AD could not be further apart in terms of their completion status. Sacred Echoes, I believe, is just done. It's completely done. I actually really want to play it at some point. I might even play it, at some point, maybe do some bonus content with it. Or maybe I'll play it alongside the actual FE15. I'm not sure, but I think it's just complete, or it's like 99% of the way there. I think there's like a few minor things that they have to tweak, but it's generally done. FE5 AD only has the first 2 chapters done, which is a shame. I do think, I especially wanted to talk about FE5 because obviously we're wrapping up FE5 today, and I think I was hoping that it would fix some of the things that I don't like about FE5, and it seems to, just based on what I saw. Like, it still has capturing. I'm pretty sure it still has fatigue. There's a whole FEUniverse page on it that I'll probably just link all the FEU pages for all the ones that I'm talking about here. At least the ones that had them in the video descriptions on YouTube. But otherwise, you could just find them on the playlist. But the main thing, I would say maybe my least favorite thing about FE5 is the Fog of War. And it is not, like, Chapter 2X is not completed, and they didn't show any footage from Chapter 2X, so I don't know how they are handling Fog of War. If they're using Thracia style Fog of War, I'm probably not going to play this game. But if they just keep it like regular Fog of War, as in like what they have done in the later games, I'm more inclined to check it out. Oh, and then the other thing that I saw that they I guess fixed, depending on how you feel about it in Thracia, is that there's no 0 to 99 hit or 1 to 99 hit limit. They have, they showed some characters who have 100 hit, so I know for a fact that that's gone. I would hope that they took out, heal stats being able to miss, but I guess I could be wrong. Again, the first healer you get is in Chapter 3, so we don't know. Actually, no, that's not true. Maybe I should go back and rewatch the video at some point, because they added a few. They're going to add a few new characters. No OCs or anything like that. Just characters who are like in Fire Emblem already. The example that they have in the trailer was Jian, who is the substitute for Nana, and who was actually planned to be a playable character at some point, or at least make an appearance in the game, because her portrait is in the game files. So, they're going to do something with that. I might talk a little bit more about that in the next episode. But anyway, that's very, very, very early on in development. I'm hoping that it fixes some of the problems I have with FE5, and if it does, I'll probably play it. And if it doesn't, I probably won't. So, that's basically where I'm at with it. I definitely wanted to mention it because, of course, we're in FE5 right now. We're wrapping it up. So if you, like me, hate FE5, you might want to keep an eye on this hack, because maybe it'll breathe new life into the experience for you. Okay, the next one that I wrote down was and this is basically, I believe, in order of where they showed up on the playlist. I'm not going in any kind of like particular order other than that. Parallel Emblem. Now this one's interesting because it seems like it is attempting to be a hack that deals a lot with like parallel worlds and characters crossing between worlds. There's some kind of like story in which the multiverse is in danger or something like that. I know that they have when I saw the gameplay footage, they had a few OCs, but then they also had Seth, like actual Seth from the Sacred Stones, I think. It looked like him, except old. So he, I think this one is more just interesting to me because that's just such a bold concept. Most FE hacks tend to focus on the grounded story, and have it be more, kind of like what the normal Fire Emblem games do, right? Like there's a country in danger, you need to fight to help protect it, and along the way you'll fight some bad guys. It's basic standard stuff for the most part. Can it be done well? Absolutely, but it usually doesn't venture past that very often. But this is just kind of crazy to me, and I no comment on the quality of it currently, because I kind of skimmed through it. It seemed pretty good, but I don't know for sure. I wasn't really paying attention to the writing at all, especially. But I have the feeling that both in terms of gameplay and in writing, that this has the potential to either be really, really good or completely go off the rails. And I'm not sure which one this is. I'm very excited to see where it goes, because I think this could be awesome. But until then, we'll have to keep our eyes on it. All right, next is Emblem. This is actually one that I have played before. I played just a very short amount of it. I think it might have even been at the last FEE3 I saw it, and I was like, "Ooh, this seems cool. I should check it out." And it's fun. It is definitely very weird. It uses a style that is difficult to get used to, because it's not really. I mean, obviously, it's not really Pokemon, but then also it's very different from any Fire Emblem experience that you would see. So I think the best way I can describe it is, especially for like the boss fights and stuff, it kind of reminds me a lot of the Link Arena. Like if you ever Google videos of the Link Arena from the GBA games, you'll see that like a lot of the time the characters are like not able to land hits. They're not able, and they get like two shot really easily, because unlike under normal circumstances where it's like your unit's up against a bunch of randos who get killed really easily, it's one strong group up against another strong group. So the footage that they used, he used a couple boss fights in his presentation, I don't know what their gender is, but they showed off, I think, the Sabrina fight, which he actually got his ass beat. I'm pretty sure the presenter was male. I don't know about the developer, but the presenter got their ass handed to them by the Sabrina fight. It was really funny, but it seemed hard, so I can't exactly blame them. And then the Lorelei fight, I didn't see how the Lorelei fight went, but it seems like the entire world of the Pokemon universe, or of like Fire Red Leaf Green, I should say, is captured here. He has some really unique ideas in terms of the gameplay. Like there's a they put in like the ice sliding puzzles. The ice sliding puzzles are integrated into the fight with Lorelei. Like her chamber is all covered in ice, so, and there's like blocks and stuff and you need to like maneuver around while also making sure not to put yourself in a bad position. It's honestly really cool. I don't know if it is actually going to be fun to play, but if nothing else, it's incredibly unique and interesting, and I highly recommend giving it a shot. I mean, I believe it's either done or close to being done. I mean, the Lorelei fight, if you're familiar at all with Pokemon, you know that the Lorelei fight is pretty close to the end of the game. So they're either, I don't know if that one's available to play right now, or if it's still like a work in progress, but I assume it's close to being done, one way or the other. So keep your eyes on that. Ooh, okay. I'm very excited about this one. So Radiant Dawn is a Fire Emblem game that I'm quite fond of, and for a very long time, the tools to hack it were not available. This is all based on rumors and things that I heard, so please take this with a grain of salt. I have not done any actual research to back up what I am talking about, so please don't take my word as gospel. But from what I have heard, there was a guy who, I don't even know their name or their screen name or whatever, who made a hack of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn called, I believe it's FE10 Redux, I think is what he called it. And it, frankly, I don't want to shit on anybody and make it, I don't want to be an asshole and insult his hard work or their hard work. I keep gendering people without knowing their gender. It seemed pretty bad. Like I'm not going to front. And I mean, it's fine, right? Like those kinds of flagship hacks I think they serve as a really great jumping off point. But, I mean, do you think the first GBA ROM hack was any good? No, it probably sucked ass. The Last Promise is famous, and it's been around for a really long time. And a lot of people really like it, but if you look at the game objectively, there's a lot wrong with it especially in terms of the writing, but also the gameplay. I've played Last Promise, and it's not bad by any means, but it's very flawed. So, that this happens, right? Like when you're making a hack for the first time, it's gonna come out rough around the edges. Now, apparently, this developer's reaction to the pretty harsh critical reception was to not I guess this person for this hack really pioneered a lot of hacking in the FE10 sphere, and then just didn't share any of it? Question mark. That's what I've always heard. I don't know if it's actually true or not, but I don't know if that's true. Sounds like kind of a dick move. But anyway, I'm really going off on this tangent here, but the reason that I'm bringing this up is because apparently there's been a lot of recent breakthroughs in the FE10 hacking scene. This FE3 presentation had not one but two FE10 hacks to show off. Both of them actually looked pretty good, but the one that has my attention more, and the one that I'm personally more interested in, is FE10 Daybreak. That one looked really good. It has a support system. It has new chapters and characters. It has, all sorts of quality of life features, new items, all sorts of cool stuff in there. And it just seems like a really fun way to breathe life into a game that I love a lot, and is also has generally been very stagnant. I mean, compared to the GBA scene, which has been hacked for years and years, the Thracia scene has not been touched basically at all until quite recently. So I'm excited to see where the developments lead in the future. We do have our FE10 randomizer. There's an FE9 randomizer. All that stuff's really cool. I'm really happy that Thracia is seeing some hacking progress for the first time, really ever. Okay, so this one is a little bit on topic as well. This is an FE8 ROM hack. Well, most of these are FE8 ROM hacks, but it is a ROM hack set in the world and in the universe of FE8 called Carcino 803, which is obviously a very direct reference to Thracia 776. I'm pretty sure the trailer even used Thracia music. I'm not sure if that's in the game or if it was just background for the trailer, but basically it is the story of people in Carcino, which is a country in FE8 where a bunch of shit happens. If you're familiar with FE8's story, there's some stuff that goes on there in the mid game, and I guess this hack focuses on those events. I don't know if it's to be honest with you, this is on here purely by concept. I don't really know how good the writing is. I didn't really get a sense of that from the trailer. The gameplay seems fine. I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with it per se, but there's nothing about it that made it jump out. I just really like the idea, and I think that this is a concept that FE5 shows can work really well narratively, is taking a small part of a larger world and really honing in on that for a specific part of the story. So, I mean, I think it would have been really cool, for example, to see more details on maybe some of the stuff that happens in Arcanea, right? Maybe finding out more about how Nina, finding more about how Nina escaped and the trials and tribulations that led up to her being where we see her in FE1/11. Now, I know that exists, and it's called BS Fire Emblem, and it's pretty cool, and I'm going to talk about that at some point. But you get the point. I mean, I think that's a great example, right? The BS Fire Emblem, as well as the remakes of those maps in the extras menu of FE12 are really cool. And I think it generally, I don't need every single detail in a story spelled out to me, but I do think that there's a lot of games in the series where parts of the story are left blank and could absolutely be filled with interesting stuff. And I would like to see more of that. So I have no idea if Carcino 803 is actually any good. I will probably try it out at some point, but my point here is I just really like the concept, and I wish more hacks would take this direction. I know it seems kind of lazy to rely on your own, or to rely on the games that came before, right? Like using those same characters, using those same locations and lore and ideas. But it seems like mostly Carcino 803 has its own unique cast. Maybe there's a couple characters that cross over, but and it seems like it has its own maps and everything, so I don't think it's really that big of a deal in this case. In fact, I think it's quite interesting. So, I don't know. That's just my personal take on it. I would like to see more hacks in this style. Okay, so next up is Fire Emblem: The Drums of War. Now, this one is pretty much on here for most of the same reasons that Alethea is, in that it seems like it's a very competently made, albeit a little simple, GBA Fire Emblem ROM hack. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, but it still kind of has its own unique style. And I would just leave it at that, except there is one other thing that I really liked about this that I think is super interesting, which is that there is something called the bounty system, which means that you can capture enemy leaders. I don't know if maybe it has to be under certain conditions. I'm not 100% sure. But if you capture an enemy leader, you have the choice of either turning them in for a bounty, which can be a nice supplement to your money, or you can have them join you. This seems very similar to the system in Fates, where you could capture... you can capture pretty much any enemy in Fates. But there were also capturable bosses that sometimes had unique skills and identities of their own, kind of. Sometimes it depends on the situation. I'm going to tip my hand a little bit here. I know we have a very long time before we get to Fates, but I will say my favorite character in Fire Emblem Fates, unironically, is Haitaka, the capturable boss in Chapter 9 of Conquest, because, goddammit, he's just so much fun to use, even though he doesn't really have any character of his own. It seems like it's a similar idea here. They don't really have any characters of their own. They don't have supports, it doesn't look like. And it says that they are worse long term, which I think means that they have bad growth rates for the most part. So, there's not really like using them isn't always going to be your best option. Sometimes you might want to turn them in for the money, but other times, if they have a unique skill or something interesting about them that you maybe lack on your team, you can utilize that. This seems like it's really interesting. It offers a unique choice that it provides more incentive for capturing than just, you get a shitty unit on your team. And I also think that it could lead to some really interesting challenge runs. Like, I'm just thinking, like, when this game comes out, I would want to do can you beat Fire Emblem: The Drums of War by using only the capturable bosses or something like that. Something goofy like that. It depends on how many there are, I guess. But it seems, for the bounty system to really work, there would have to be at least a solid few. But I don't know. Anyway, this game seems pretty cool. I'm excited for it. It says I think it's about a third of the playable chapters are about a third of the total content that is planned. And I think, I don't know how far they are into the rest of it, but, so go check it out if you're interested. The FEU page was not listed in the video description, but I did manage to find it. So I'll link that in the description of the episode as well. So next up, I have Fire Emblem Blade and Claw. So first of all, this one got bonus points for sure for using Cowboy Bebop music in the trailer. But aside from that, it honestly just seems kind of cool. It has a lot of unique gameplay ideas. It seems like there's like bases that you can walk around in. There are various interesting new gameplay mechanics. Like there's some kind of like barricade system, it looks like. I'm wondering if this is similar to the rubble in Fates, where you can pick it up and then put it somewhere else and create different choke points and stuff like that. If that's the case, then that sounds like it could be kind of interesting. Or if it's not, that's also fine. And then there's a big emphasis on pair up. So I guess this one is less on here for more of like the quality, although again it does look quite polished. But also, like, the main reason is because it just looks really unique, and it's kind of like the opposite of Alethea, Whereas that game seemed much more on the simple side, but looked like really well done. This looks like it has the potential to be garbage, but I mean, I don't know. It might be good. It seems like it looks good so far, but just conceptually, it is really interesting, and I wanted to include it for that reason, mostly. So next up, I have Fire Emblem Genesis. I'm putting Fire Emblem before most of these. I hope that's not weird. I think, we all know that they're Fire Emblem ROM hacks, so... Anyway, Fire Emblem Genesis. Now, there are two Fire Emblem Genesis hacks. Unfortunately, they do have the same name, which leads to the awkward situation where I have to be like, well, no, not that one, the other one. Now, the one that I am referring to is Genesis by Melodonius, is I believe how you pronounce it. There's also one called Genesis by someone called Praising Intensifies. That one also looks great. Like, this is not a knock on that game at all. It just didn't have anything that really caught my attention personally, but it seems like a solid, well polished game. Nothing wrong with that. But this one, honestly, if I'm going to be completely real with you guys, nothing about this would have caught my eye either. I mean, the trailer has voice acting, which is cool, but outside of that, I mean, it looks like a solid Fire Emblem game. Nothing super crazy or anything like that. But I scroll down to the comments, right? I look at the comments for a few of these, and it's just nothing but rave reviews. Like, everyone is saying, like, play this hack, it's really good. Play it. It's apparently excellent. And also finished. It's 100% done. So, I highly recommend you check this out and tell me if it's any good or not. But, and I mean, like, the gameplay, when I say it didn't catch my attention, it doesn't even look bad. It's nothing really stood out about it. But, supposedly, it's really, really good. So, I'm going to check that out at some point for sure, and I hope you guys do the same. Okay, and last, but certainly not least, we have the second game on this list that I have played, which is Fire Emblem Staff of Ages. It's back, baby! I remember I talked a little bit about this in an earlier episode, and I mentioned that, Staff of Ages was probably my favorite ROM hack that I had played. Again, it's not anything crazy, but it is a very solid, well-made hack. But the big problem was that it wasn't finished, and I mean, it still isn't. Don't get too excited. It's not done yet. It's taking a really, really long time to come out, and people in the comments are saying stuff about like, oh, Staff of Ages really lives up to its name. But it, like, every time we get a new trailer for it, it's looking better and better. Like, it seems like it's good, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. I don't know how far along it is, but hopefully they wrap it up relatively soon. Because I don't want to be waiting for it for another 10 years, but regardless, I'm just glad that it's not dead. That's really the main thing. More so than, like, I've already talked about Staff of Ages in a previous episode, like I said, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the things I like about it, but I just really wanted to bring it up to mention that it is not dead, and I am very excited about that. So keep your eyes on that. So those 10, along with Starlit Souls, are the hacks that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. The finished ones I may play. I don't really like playing unfinished ROM hacks, although the sad reality is that out of the 70 some odd games in the playlist, a fraction of those will actually get finished, which is not, a knock on anyone in particular. Like, making Fire Emblem ROM hacks is hard. Making anything related to video games is very hard. So, it's not a failure by any means. It's just a shame when you see a cool hack and you're like, oh, this looks really awesome, and then you find out that it's been abandoned for 5 years, and it'll probably never be finished, which, it happens to a lot of these. I'm really hoping that of the unfinished ones that I went through, all of them will get finished, or at least most of them, because I would very much like to see these in action. The ones that I believe are finished are Sacred Echoes, Poke Emblem, and Genesis. Those are the 3 that I am either know are completely done, or at least people say they're completely done. But then also, Poke Emblem looks to be about done. If it's not there, then it's like very, very close. So, those ones should probably be your top priorities, but the other ones definitely check out if you have time to delve into a few demos. Okay. I plan to make this a yearly thing. I am a little bit late on this one. FEE3 was like a month ago. So I think I could have had most of this stuff out in the last episode, but it is what it is. I'm glad that I'm talking about it at all. FEE3 is just such a cool community project that I love to watch every year. I think I might have skipped it last year, but I definitely will be watching it every year as long as I'm doing this podcast and talking about it on here, because it just seems really damn cool. And maybe one day if I make it big, I can be a presenter on FEE3, but that's a distant dream for sure. But anyway, with that done, and I'm not going to go through this already. This episode is already going to be probably about 3 hours long, so I'm not going to talk about anything else I've been doing. You will see me in the next episode where we talk about my final thoughts on Thracia 776 and plans going forward. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I will have a surprise for you guys in that episode, but I'm not going to make any promises because I don't know how it's going to work out, but we'll see. All right, take it easy, guys. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.